Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Manga Writer and welcome to part 2 of my very long retrospective surrounding the crime-riddled world of Death Note. I promise that I will not be re-uploading this video 3 or more times like before. True fans will understand that reference. Also, if you had no idea that this video was a part 2, here is a link to the first part in the card, where I discuss the manga in very excessive detail. If this video is as long as that, I'm going to scream. For a brief old history lesson before we dive in, the anime adaptation of Death Note was developed by Studio Madhouse and was first televised on Nippon TV in Japan on the 4th of October 2006, and ended on the 27th of June in 2007. On the 10th of January 2007, Viz Media bought the licensing rights to the series, making it the first ever anime that was made legally available for people to download while it was still airing on Japanese television, making its reach way bigger than it was before. The first episode was also the first directorial debut of a man named Tetsuro Araki, a man who would go on to direct lesser-known shows like, High School of the Dead, Guilty Crown, the 2022 movie Bubble, and the first season of a very niche anime, Attack on Titan. I'm Mimi, of course, but good lord, that is a resume and a half. The anime was for me the first bit of Death Note content I ever consumed, and after my 4th or 5th viewing of this show after all these years since my first, I found myself generally having the same outlook as I did all those years ago. I still find Light and L's fight to be very engaging, and with some of the changes the anime made to the original story, I truly appreciated just how tight and precise the writing of this adaptation was, at least in the first 25 episodes, but we will get to that when we get there. Like the manga before it, I'll be reviewing and going through these episodes one by one and giving my thoughts as I go, going as in-depth or as brief as I think is necessary. With this strategy, every episode will be accounted for, and I will hopefully not forget anything important. Emphasis on hopefully. While I sprinkle in some fun facts when I find them appropriate. Also for this retrospective, I will be covering the English dub of Death Note and not the Japanese dub. I'm doing this solely because I think the dub is vastly superior. Don't bother fighting in the comments, you're not going to change my mind. So what better way to start off part 2 of this retrospective than with the anime's adaptation of the L Saga, which are episodes 1 to 25. Being an almost one-to-one adaptation of the first chapter of Death Note, the anime hits the ground running with a superb first episode, managing to capture the vibes and the spirit of the manga incredibly well, while also having enough of its own identity to make it not a carbon copy of its source material. One way that they do this is that they change the back and forth method the manga tells its story and replaces it with a more streamlined and chronological order of events, sticking to a more rigid timeline all throughout. To use episode 1 as an example, in the manga, the order of events were: Light and Ryuk both establish their core beliefs, Ryuk tells his boys that he dropped his Death Note and goes to Earth from the Shinigami realm, Light picks up the Death Note and takes it home to study it, 5 days pass and Light meets Ryuk for the first time, where Ryuk explains the concept of heaven and hell, and admits to dropping the Death Note for funsies. The manga flashes back to Light using the Death Note, and after killing 2 people, gets slowly corrupted by its power. And then the chapter ends with Light proclaiming he will become a god, while the police force and L are revealed last minute. In the anime, it tells the same story, but goes about it a lot differently. Episode 1 begins in the Shinigami realm and shows off the boredom of the Shinigami before we see Ryuk himself, heavily emphasizing the sheer deadness of such a realm through the Shinigami looking and sounding like husks. The anime then cuts to Light in class, where he is ordered to translate a text that has the biblical subtlety of the Great Flood.
Follow the teachings of God and receive his blessings. And so it shall be, the seas will again become bountiful, and the raging storms will subside.
And we get a montage of Light going about his daily routine, all while the voiceover narrates about recent criminals arrested for murder. It is here do we get the commonality between Light and Ryuk, who both state that the world is rotten rather than Ryuk being bored, which I think is a nice and subtle way to hide his true intentions for dropping the Death Note for later. After the opening title card, Light is shown to have seen the Death Note fall from the sky rather than seeing it already on the ground, and after picking it up, heads home to study the contents. And this is where the anime takes a slight detour from the manga. Rather than 5 days passing, the anime takes the flashback from the manga and puts the scenes of Light killing 2 people here, continuing on from Light's curiosity about the Death Note. The anime, however, decides at the ending scene of Light killing the biker, where he's in an alleyway sickened by his actions, and saves it for later. After these moments are done, the anime jumps back to the second scene of the manga, where Ryuk heads off for Earth, and it's here do the two finally meet up. The anime also does a small change that I like, where instead of hard cutting to 5 days passing like in the manga, the anime shows Light pulling out the Death Note from his drawer, where you see all the names that he wrote down, making you question how long he's had it until Ryuk passively mentions the time. Which I think is way more effective at making Light look nuts, because until you know that it's been 5 days, you would have no idea if Light did all that in a couple of days, or a couple of hours. The lore of no one but Light being able to see Ryuk is also done much more efficiently here, with a small scene of Light's mom coming in to check on him and not spotting Ryuk, whereas in the manga, Ryuk had flown out of Light's window and told him what the story was. This episode also had the first scene of many of Ryuk eating apples, and my god, the animation on him eating is just so weird. When Ryuk exposes the very shallow nature of Light picking up the Death Note, it's here that the anime dives into Light's motivation on using the Death Note, where I personally found the anime's adaptation so much cleaner and more effective at getting the severity of Light's actions across. Once the show takes the one scene from the manga flashback it cut out and uses it here to show Light's descendant into maniacal justice, the anime then plays a scene of Light in class, and a passage from the book he's reading can be read in plain English, the passage making broad remarks about humanity's growth and negative impact on Earth. What's even more clever is that this was the passage that people who were paying attention would realize was the paragraph that the teacher was reading during the scene of Light seeing the Death Note fall from the sky, showcasing just how early on Light was having these thoughts.
Another noticeable consequence is the extinction of many species on the planet. Species are now becoming extinct at a faster rate than has ever occurred in our recorded history.
We then get the first of many montages of Light killing criminals in rapid succession, with the anime going all in with the medium to make Light look like a serial killer with how he writes the names with the movements of a skilled assassin. From its quick cuts and dynamic angles, this montage perfectly represented the chaos and sheer adrenaline rush Light was feeling killing all of those people at once, damaging his mind beyond return and devoting himself to his cause of making a better world. With his proclamation of justice being made for Ryuk to hear, Ryuk gets just as excited to see the chaos unfold, and the episode ends on this high note, rather than ending on the mystery of L, something that I found to be far better and made me more excited to watch the next episode. The anime adaptation is a masterclass on how to keep an audience hooked. Like, holy shit, this show is so bingeable and there is so much shit to come with that. The anime did an absolutely amazing job at pacing the narrative and making the story and themes a lot easier to digest without sacrificing any of the spirit that the original version had. This adaptation merely exemplified them, using the animation and score to build up from what was originally a very big and grand story. And the music for this anime is just, it is flawless. From the chilling choirs to the overall church aesthetic, this score does a fantastic job at heightening the tension and bringing this otherworldly vibe towards the whole narrative, wrapping up this episode in a very handsome bow. Here's a couple of fun facts. In 2007, when the recordings for the English dub began, Brad Swally, the voice actor for Light, was the first person they recorded, meaning he was completely on his own when he recorded his lines for the first 4 episodes of the show. Brad states that when auditioning for Light, it was quite a unique experience, because unlike other characters where directors would only give actors a couple of lines, he was given chunks of dialogue for Light, allowing him to feel more for the character. Voice director Carl Willems said that through Brad's instincts, he easily got the role. Carl also says that he has known and worked with Brad on other projects long before Death Note. Ryuk's voice actor Brian Drummond only got the role on a dime. In interviews, he stated that he wasn't actually planning to audition for Ryuk, but other characters like Soichiro and some cops. And it was only from looking at an image of Ryuk and bringing a picture of him to the director did he ask to do a quick read. He did a take for Ryuk on the fly after reading about him for 3 to 4 minutes, and as you can hear, the rest was history. While episode 1 was a near one-to-one adaptation of the first chapter, episode 2 starts the trend of adapting multiple chapters into one episode, this episode adapting chapters 2, 3, and 4. But like last time, the anime has its own ideas that it likes to implement to enhance the story. In the first scene, Light is once again in class, where the teacher and Light read a passage from a book that not so subtly recaps on the emotions Light felt upon killing so many people in episode 1.
Having finally made his dream a reality, he was overwhelmed, both by the magnitude of his achievement and by the joy and happiness that it brought him.
I love this shit, it's great. And after we get a scene that showcases Light's popularity that the anime mysteriously doesn't focus on as much, we get to the events of chapter 2 where Light briefly talks to Ryuk. It's after this small exchange where the anime begins making a lot of clever choices with pacing, as it's here where they introduce the lore of a Shinigami being seen if anybody touches the notebook by having Sayu bug Light about mathematics, a scene that was taken from chapter 3. This moment not only humanizes Light a bit quicker than before, but it felt so natural that it didn't feel forced in whatsoever. If you have only experienced the anime, you wouldn't be wrong in thinking that that's how the story was always meant to be. That's how seamless this change was. Though one scene the anime took out that I wish they didn't was the brief conversation Light had with Ryuk about dealing with hearing about Kira all over the place. I don't know, but I always found that small scene to be quite an impactful one as it shows Light's sort of disconnect to his Kira identity and also humanizes him dealing with all the stress. But hey ho, we can't have everything. It's also from this scene and the small change from episode 1's ending do we get the full stuff involving the police force and their meeting with L. L's introduction after a sea of arguing was a really good way to build tension, and him talking through a voice filter that makes it impossible to tell who or what he is was a very nice touch. During his monologue, we get the scene of Light burning some fluid at a dump in preparations for hiding the Death Note, a scene from chapter 4. And after L finishes up his declaration of catching Light from chapter 2 and stating that they do his investigation in Japan from chapter 4, the anime jumps forward to chapter 4 again, where it shows off Light making and demonstrating the hiding place of the Death Note. A transition that, like the Sayu scene, feels so natural that you'd think that this was how it was meant to be. But before the Light and L confrontation can truly begin, the anime plays a small scene where the public is reacting to Light's crusade, something that Light wanted to happen from episode 1, speculating on who might have done it and why, with one guy even believing that it was the police carrying out the killings. The way that the people talk about the killings like it's just everyday gossip is so chilling for some reason, and with this montage, the show finally names Light Kira, flawlessly transitioning back to chapter 2 where Light shows Ryuka's porn, shows off his impact on the internet, and Lindell Taylor, along with L, makes his first appearance. I know that people have made jokes about this before, but I do find it funny that the way Light shouts at his monitor just sometimes would lead to very funny scenarios among his family.
I am justice! I protect the innocent and those who fear evil! I'm the one who will become the god of a new world that everyone desires!
But after his decry of war, Lindell Taylor dies, and L emerges a lot quicker than before. In the manga, L's symbol appeared when he told Light he existed, but here, he's there when he stammers on what just happened. Which honestly I think is quite interesting, as it makes L out as not such a calculating person, and the symbol now has more than just calculating coldness attached to its image. It's cool stuff. But after his whole entire monologue that was flawlessly performed, and with the declaration of war the two of them shout being made after L hangs up rather than before in the manga, with the anime changing the word righteous to a far more fitting justice given the nature of the story, the anime gives the two a deeper sense of connection, where even though they can't hear the other speak, they know exactly what the other is thinking. A tiny detail that likely doesn't mean much, but I found to still be incredibly neat. We also get a sneak peek of the true voice of L, voiced by Alessandro Giuliani. And when I say that this man is L, he is L. Listen to how he talks both in and out of character.
Early on in the investigation, I tried to provoke Kira with that broadcast. Up until then, we thought that Kira would only go after criminals.
My background is music. I went to university and did a degree in opera when I was very young.
It's actually terrifying on just how little Alessandro changed his voice. Thanks to saving all of L's scenes for episode 2, the show manages to masterfully capture the viewer's attention with the same force as the first episode. Whereas episode 1 ended with this sense of the story being quite open-ended on how everything is going to go for Light, episode 2 makes it concrete on what the overarching story of Death Note is going to be. The story goes from being on a global scale to a personal one, flawlessly changing the story from being one person against the world to one person against another. L's theme song makes its debut here, and like the songs from the last episode, it is a masterful track. The way the song has a slow build-up and has a beat that comes just a tad too early, and then builds up to some really good electric guitars. It audibly represented L's unpredictable and sporadic nature perfectly. Fun facts about some of the actors from episode 2, starting with Alessandro. Alessandro was between the ages of 11 and 12 when he first started voice acting, with the first role he got being allegedly the first animated show to be dubbed in Vancouver. When he got the part of L, he was allowed to watch the series before recording, and he found this very helpful in getting a read on L's character, which was probably why his performance was flawless. He also studied music and opera when he was younger, and involved himself a lot in the technical aspects of film and acting. He definitely comes off like he knows his stuff, with one interview really showcasing the more technical approach he has towards voice acting.
I have found that having sort of a basic knowledge of some of the programs that the engineers use in the studio, Pro Tools, and also having a knowledge of mic technique, but from the engineer's side, you can't do anything but help you as an actor in the studio as well. All of these things give you brand new perspectives on what it's like to be on this side of the camera, and really, at the end of the day, how pampered we all are on this side, you know.
Speaking of studying music, did you know that he was in some Barbie movies? And in those movies he sung?
All these questions keep turning and churning and burning inside me.
My guy can sing up a storm, like, goddamn. Death Note was also the first time Carl Willems ever worked with Alessandro, and he had nothing but good things to say about him.
He's so good. He's really natural. He's just a really good actor. And I know when we did the audition, we had a lot of good reads for L, reads that I was happy with, you know. But when he came in, it was just, oh yeah, that's the one. His instincts are almost all bang on. So yeah, just sort of take him up, let him off the leash and let him run. He's
Watori's voice actor, French Tickner, had been doing voice acting for 25 years and was typecast as Santa a good few times. And Vincent Tong, the voice of Matsuda, found himself relating a lot to his goofy personality, using personal experiences to sell his lines. He also wasn't too familiar with the character before recording and found the balancing between comedic and serious a bit hard to do. But as the final result will show later on, holy shit, this guy nailed it. All in all, banger episode. On to the next. Episode 3 takes off with a scene from Chapter 3 of the police force managing the reports of Kira. The anime switching up the information they found slightly from the original. It's nothing too drastic, besides L saying his theory on Kira's childish morality being a lot earlier, so going into nitty-gritty details of the changes they made to the scene isn't really necessary. However, I do want to say that Matsuda giving Soichiro a coffee after the meeting and not speaking to him outside of the building like in the manga was a much better place for the two of them to talk, as it felt a lot more natural and grounded. But as we get another scene of Light helping out Sayu, which accidentally or intentionally showed off Light being a consistently good role model for his sister, Light finally sits down and eats with his dad. The scene where he goes and says hi to his father plays, and for a split second he has no highlights in his eyes, which is wonderfully creepy. Which I think did a great job at intensifying the scene before of Light ensuring Ryuk that he would find out if the cops came after him. Small little add-ins that the anime does like that is just so well done. After a dinner scene that shows off Light's anxiety and emotional disconnect from his family and a tiny bit of shaky cam, Light is revealed that he has been using the family account to get criminals, and begins to start his unholy experiments, mixing in a few scenes from chapters 3, 4, and 5 as the anime jumps back and forth a few times, resulting in a surprisingly streamlined series of events. The anime also adds in a small scene of Ryuk seeing Ray Pember outside while Light is attending a class, which while it makes the reveal that Light is being followed a tiny bit less tense as it's not as shocking or sudden, I still vibe with it nonetheless, mainly with how the anime chose to make Ryuk reveal that fact to Light in such a creepy way.
You're being followed by another human. He's watching you right now.
The way the music stops like the air is being sucked from your lungs, I love it. And the episode ends with a glorious cliffhanger after Ryuk mentions the Shinigami eyes and the deal one can make in order to get them, with Light's decision being held off for the next episode, much like the manga's original ending, which was an absolutely genius move, and made better with the anime showing Ray Penber right outside Light's house. It's also in this episode where we see what the world looks like for Ryuk for the first time, and the decision to make everything red and blurry was such a great choice. Making the world look so eerie and even hellish from Ryuk's perspective, and seeing that the name and numbers above Light's head look almost liquid as if it's uncertain, it's just awesome. This anime continues to impress. This episode takes the jumping back and forth approach once again, as it takes many scenes from chapters 3, 5, 6, and 7, and compiles them into a much more comfortable viewing. After Light refuses to take the ideal, the anime has him talk to Ryuk about the Shinigami realm and what Ryuk could do when he gets back, with Ryuk calling Light a positive thinker, a conversation that in the manga took place before the ideal. I found this change of placement to actually really help in balancing Light's whole outlook on life, with him coming off as someone who, while very idealistic, wouldn't want to get his hands too dirty in achieving his own goals. The conversation and its flow just felt way more natural, and it's here that Light decides to experiment with the Death Note and find out Ray Penber's name. From here on, episode 4 is a fairly one-to-one adaptation of chapter 6 and 7. With the show making no attempts at splicing in any extra scenes and changing out the placements of any moments from before. The only more notable scene is that we actually see the face of the girl Light takes out on a date before they meet up.
Believe it or not, I'm actually a rather popular guy. Ryuk.
God, Brad did so good at making Light sound like a hooer. And from here on, what you see in the manga is what you get in the anime. The show adding some small bits of dialogue that do a good job at making Light look a bit more human.
I don't get it, Light. Didn't you say you weren't going out until entrance exams were over?
That was before I scored #1 on the national practice exams.
Oh, you're such a nerd.
Good shit. Good shit. Though one thing I thought was interesting was that for the bus hijacking scene, the criminal's gun was changed from a revolver to a pistol. I'm sure there's more technical terms for these guns, but I'll just let the Americans handle that. Which I think was a bit odd, but it's nothing too major. If anything, I think it's probably done just because it was easier to animate. And from there, it goes accurate all the way to the man's death, with the anime doing, in my opinion, a way better job at having Ryuk look so much scarier to the criminal. My god, the shots they use and the way Ryuk slowly moves towards the man is so fucking creepy. This shot of his eyes is terrifying. And having the small detail of Ray Penber just running straight through him was also a really good touch. The way the music was building up and up throughout the scene, all to be cut off when the car comes speeding by and slamming into the guy, and have it come back when Light explains everything that had just happened over a shot of the scenario being written down in the Death Note, made this episode an incredibly memorable one. It had all the thrills and intensity that will only get higher as the series goes on. As Ray runs off like in chapter 8 and the anime takes out the small scene of Light's date being a very well-adjusted woman in times of crisis, which is sort of a shame because it was quite funny, Ray gets to talking with Naomi Misura. In the English dub, Naomi Misura is played by Tabitha St. Germain, who, if you're into a show about ponies, you would recognize her as the voice of Rarity.
Well, and how does muddying my hooves serve any useful purpose?
Think about it. You got on that bus because you were investigating someone, right? And now you're telling me that this criminal is most likely dead.
I just think that actors with this kind of range deserve nothing but respect. You just know that she got Naomi out of talent alone. Ray Penber's actor, Michael Adamthwaite, also has his time to shine. His tone being this lovely, smooth, and gentle yet firm voice that just makes me cling onto every word he says. The conversation between these two is also a brilliant example of just how naturally sounding the acting and the dialogue is. Seriously, I wish that I could play you more than just a few seconds at a time, but trust me when I say this, the conversations in this anime are really, really good. But after we get through Light's plan to stay low for the time being while also playing his little Gods of Death game with L, the anime makes another big pacing change. In the manga, Ray's death was a flashback that was built up as a mystery towards the FBI agents dying in chapters 8 and 9. But in the show, it decided to get rid of that mystery and show Ray's death from chapter 9 first, which given how well they managed to put the scenes in order so far, I'm perfectly okay with. This very streamlined approach of events certainly wasn't as strange or as sudden like it was in the manga, which I could only assume was done so that the next chapter would be something more people would be hyped to read. I mean, expecting mysteries from a mystery manga, you know, it would make sense. It's like expecting water to be wet. But going back to the flashback that now isn't a flashback, Rei's death and the game that Light played with his life over this episode was truly creepy to watch. Unlike the manga's panels that were filled with bustling people to show off how creepy it is to see Light do this without anyone noticing, the anime has these wide, empty shots of the station that have only Light and Rei in them, a large spotlight shining down and enveloping both of their faces in shadow. While it was probably on a technical aspect done to save on animating people, I find that this much greater focus on just the two of them makes Light even more threatening, because Rei is now visually represented as the only one who can hear him and knows who he is. He's now trapped, and there's nowhere he can go or anything he can do. Every move of his is under a microscope, being monitored and accounted for, which the anime showcases wonderfully. Light fading off into the shadows after he gives Rei his instructions and is then not seen again for a good while is a really menacing touch. Throughout the whole scene onwards, I loved the way the colors and the atmosphere feel more claustrophobic, as you know that there is truly no way for Rei to escape his destiny. They even changed the images of the FBI agents to look more realistic, which I guess maybe these are people who worked on the show, and this is a little Easter egg probably. But either way, I think it was a pretty cool detail. But alas, everything goes like it did in the manga, and seeing that quick flashing shot revealing the beginning of Rei's heart attack, and the shot of Light looming over Rei's dead body and the train doors closing as Rei's pupils go dark as he dies along with the music is just mwah, good fucking soup. Gotta love that loud clang that echoes at the end as it transitions to the next scene. Death Note's anime pacing is seriously such a wonderful improvement. Also, one detail that just went completely over my head in regards to the implications of the Death Note that I didn't point out in the manga. One of the rules is that the user would not go to heaven or hell when they die. So with Light making Rei unintentionally kill all his fellow agents, Light basically damned an innocent man to a life of purgatory without him even knowing what he'd done. I know that in the manga this doesn't have the implication because Oba was an atheist, but in the anime, that confirmation of there being no heaven and hell is still up in the air. That shit's never confirmed. And so with this iteration, we don't know, and god, that is so fucked up to think about. But with this scene all done and dusted, the anime now has to jump back to chapter 8 where L is called by the head of the FBI. But here their conversation is much shorter and to the point. In this version, L has no chance to ask any of the questions about the killings, and after the FBI director says he's out, that's the end of it. What's worse is that before L can even react to what's happening, the anime gets Soichiro talking to him straight after, berating him for using the FBI to spy on the police. A scene that is very different to the pacing of the manga, where Soichiro never did that. All of these drastic cuts towards a bunch of scenes from the manga while not allowing L to have some fun being a detective like in the OG source material makes this scene feel like that all of a sudden L's leg up over everyone in this fight came crashing down before he could even react, with Soichiro taking none of L's cold and calculating answers lightly. L is basically being attacked from all sides in a much faster fashion, with a sense of hopeless frustration only exemplified with L getting the last Kira note, which comes immediately afterwards and not a day later like in the manga. L doesn't even get to make a declaration about having anything to work with like in the OG story. The anime just cuts to Naomi crying right after L says, "Damn you, Kira," making this scene one where L has been beaten down to square one with flimsy connections at best to work with. Something that I think did amazing at raising the stakes. This less of a one-to-one retelling and more of a collage of manga scenes crammed into a barely 2-minute scene in the anime shows off another strength of the show's adaptation, taking out unnecessary fluff, keeping what's important to the story, and merging sometimes entirely different scenes together to make a certain scene have much more weight behind it. This small moment is a golden example, and it's so tightly written that I just can't help but be impressed. But with chapter 8's important parts all done, the anime can now finally move back to chapter 9 with Soichiro talking to his family at dinner. And then jumps forward again to chapter 10 where Soichiro gives the task force the choice of staying or going, jumping back a scene to Naomi going on her quest to find Kira, and then jumping forward again to Soichiro and the boys demanding that they meet up with L, who can I just say can type up a fucking storm, my god he's got hands. I know I said that like these were sudden cuts, but trust me, the way the anime did it made it feel way more natural. And the show has this vibe of things escalating and becoming more sinister as it goes on. I really dig it. Also, small detail that most likely means nothing, the hotel L is staying in is called the Tater Hotel, yet in the manga it was called the Imperial Hotel. I have no idea why they made that change personally, but things like that are always interesting to me. And like the manga before it, the episode ends right before we see L's face, with Soichiro opening the hotel door, the sound of it echoing as the end card appears. Aside from chopping many scenes, pacing the story differently, and taking out entire scenes like Light, Sayu, and their mom having a small family back and forth, episode 5 was still a brilliant episode. And like its page-turning predecessor, it only makes me want to slap on the next episode, where more changes and glow-ups are bound to occur. Episode 6 is off to a steady start, with its first 11 minutes being a near perfect one-to-one of the 11th chapter of the manga.
Bang!
The only real change being that during L's monologue, there's a small scene taken from chapter 10 where Light acknowledges that he's been active over the course of a few days, the same days that L believes Kira was around. It sounds like nothing, but personally, I thought it was a good choice to show that Light and L are both thinking the same thing at the same time, connecting the two in more subtle ways that breaks the scene up so that you're not just watching L ramble on for too long uninterrupted. Both of them are also not aware of the one loose end that could expose Light, with Naomi making a great appearance right before the mid-credits, exactly like chapter 11's ending. So far, very few changes, but some nice glow-ups have been made. But as we resume with the episode, there's an added scene of Light trying to rationally calm himself down about the bus jacking and how he should be completely fine given that no one should know that he can kill his victims besides a heart attack. This small scene I thought was very good, since the show is certainly taking more time to make Light more anxious in places that feel quite fitting. But as we continue on to Light volunteering to give his dad some spare clothes, the anime very briefly jumps back to chapter 11 to have Naomi's monologue about her theory on Kira, which was a change that I think does great in making the eventual clash of the two much more effective, since they're now feeling like they're happening around the same time.
Both the police and L don't know that Kira can kill people by means other than a heart attack. If anyone were to discover that fact, I'd be in a lot of trouble.
In the business, we call this foreshadowing.
Also, the really nice way that the show animated some scenes of Naomi walking to the police station makes it look quite unfocused and jarring that I believe is a way for you to look into the mind of Naomi before she reaches her eureka moment. Everything feels dreamy, almost hazy in a way that Naomi thinking so hard about how Kira could kill all those people that day is not really taking in her surroundings, like her mind is in a different place. It's a neat little detail. What's also an interesting change was that during the scene of Naomi trying to get in contact with the task force, she outright states that she has information regarding the Kira case, rather than the manga having her tell Light later. This I think was a good idea, since now that Light overheard her true intentions, he's now fully alert towards Naomi, rather than it being a surprise for him later on. Some might disagree with me and say that the latter one makes Naomi have more of an impact, and that's totally fair, but to me, Light having his anxiety rise before he even knows Naomi's face still makes the tension between the two quite engaging. It certainly gets him more active and having to improvise much quicker, so that's always cool. But after the anime changes Light's brutal roast towards receptionist to a more human and awkward interaction, Light and Naomi finally get to talking. And here the anime does its usual thing of changing up a few scenes to better the pacing, along with taking out some dialogue that gets in the way, making Light and Naomi's interaction more natural in my opinion. Also in the anime adaptation, Light and Naomi never sit down to discuss Kira, but are outside from the very start of their conversation, the show taking out the reasoning Light decided to go out in the first place. Something that was done to probably make for a more visually interesting scene, which I'm not against at all. Plus, we don't need to know why Light does every single action he does, it's fine. And for the next few minutes, the anime keeps its creative flair shackled, with the anime keeping true to the script of the manga, with Ryuk letting out such beautifully twisted laughs when Naomi lies about her name. This episode is also where we get a taste of how the show is going to handle inner monologues, as when one begins, the colors sap away and leave a glaring single color behind, with Light's being a very harsh red. The anime will be using these way more, and not only is it an easy way to tell when the characters are thinking internally, but god, it makes for such good visual flair, and it certainly kept my attention. Also, like I've been saying before, my god, the voice actors make every line sound just so normal that it's almost scary. The way everybody talks, God, Death Note's cast is stellar, but after the anime gives Ryuk some dialogue that pretty much spells out that Naomi was Light's oversight, episode 6 ends on a great cliffhanger, with a very familiar dark scene ready to make its appearance. Episode 7, much like the chapters it adapts, is one of the most gripping and engaging episodes I've seen from the show, and the very reason I think that is just how perfectly the scenes are pieced together. Once Light gets to an anxious hurdle, it cuts to the task force and Elle discussing more about Kira, and right before they reach a big conclusion, it cuts right back to Light and Naomi. While the anime cuts to and fro much more frequently than the OG manga, I find this more rapid pace of jumping between these two parallel stories a change that ended up giving this arc more of an edge than the manga's execution, because it's almost like the writers knew exactly when to leave each scene off on just the right amount of suspense so that you're just itching to see what happens next. That kind of storytelling is very difficult to achieve, but to do that with two stories at the same time is nothing short of impressive. God, the episodes surrounding Naomi are just great. The team absolutely locked in making these ones. This episode also makes Ryuk so much more imitating and involved. Whereas in the manga he's more in the background jumping in for some quick one-liners, anime Ryuk has a lot more things to say. Every so often he'll make a jab at Light and voicing his pure interest in how everything is unfolding, giving him a presence that I'm sure is very hard for Light to ignore entirely. And Ryuk is having the time of his life watching Light squirm, as Brian's laughs get more and more unhinged until he just straight up breaks into hysteria, with the anime using intense red lighting that nearly blacks out Ryuk's form that makes him look so demonic as he shakes the camera with him. God, this is this is the good shit. And with Light managing to get her to buckle and give him her real name, we get to the scene that when I watched this for the first time, completely changed my view of Death Note. The death of Naomi Misora. As you would remember from the manga, what made Naomi's death so creepy was that after that last panel of her walking away, that is the last time you ever see her. Where she went and how she died is a complete mystery, one that throughout the rest of the story never gets solved. With that kind of end, you can only imagine what Light would have done to have it so that it feels like she practically disappeared off the face of the earth without a trace, which makes him quite scary. But in the anime, the animation reveals, or at least insinuates, on how Naomi possibly died, by animating her walking up to a gallows, where you can only assume she hanged herself like the other victims who died by suicide. You don't get to actually see her hanging herself because the anime decides to hard cut to the end card before she could even do it, ending the episode on a very unsettling note that to this day creeps the fuck out of me. Now I believe that both deaths have their strengths and their weaknesses. On one hand, not knowing what happened to Naomi does certainly get the imagination going on what might have happened to her, but it can also feel like it was an artsy way to have her be written out of the story as soon as possible without having to go overboard. After all, if Oba didn't want her around anymore because she was causing too many problems, her just disappearing from the narrative after that panel just makes sense to me. The death, while sharp, is still effective. And with the anime giving you an idea of how she died, and to have that idea be something as harsh and harrowing as hanging yourself, is such a barbaric and cruel way for Light to kill someone. The imagery, while taking away the mystery of how Naomi died, still gives off that same creepiness factor that you have towards Light, because it basically shows that methods like hanging, a form of death that is known for being agonizing and slow, is not off the table for Light, making him look like a bloodthirsty and savage demon, bathing in the suffering of his mind-controlled victims. However, this dramatic form of death does contradict the passage that Light wrote, which was, and I quote, "thinks of the best way to commit suicide that won't bother others and will make it so her body isn't discovered, thinks of nothing but suicide, carries out her plan, and dies within 48 hours. And I don't want to sound too casual when I say this, but I think if Naomi hanged herself in a public space, she would get discovered quite quickly, and it would probably bother someone quite a lot should they have found her body. However, that kind of analysis is me taking the imagery very literally, and given that Death Note is a very artistic show that loves to bend reality for the sake of interesting imagery, I feel like that wasn't the shot's intention. I'm more in the camp of this shot being more akin to a dramatization of her dying. Like, the gallows represents how Light sees her death like a victory, and he's a mighty king escorting a traitor or enemy to their death through such a public display of power and wrath. It's either that, or maybe Naomi actually did hang herself, but in a place that no one would find anytime soon, like a small house or an abandoned land, keeping true to the note Light wrote, which if you want to go down that route is very unsettling to imagine. As you can probably guess by how much I'm talking about this version of the scene, I feel that the anime's portrayal of Naomi's death was much greater than the manga's version, not just because of the insinuation it gave off through its imagery, but also the way it built up to Light's win. During the build-up, the score is that same music that plays during a very intense scene from episodes before. And like the deaths of the hijacker and Ray, once it reaches the grand crescendo when Naomi gives Light her ID, the music dies almost instantly. Here though, it feels a bit different. The score drawing back so suddenly feels like the air along with your breath is sucked out of the room, as all you can do is watch in bated horror as Light incites his plan in front of unsuspecting eyes. For a few moments, it's deathly quiet. The sound effects of the wind, Aizawa's heavy footsteps as he passes, and the low voices that feel amplified from the silence are all that can be heard. Then, as Light reveals himself to be Kira, his eyes have that sinister glow, and right as Naomi is about to gasp in horror through animation that takes in every wrinkle of her eyes as she realizes what's about to happen just a second too late, the watch on Light's wrist crashes to the last second, the sound a loud and horrible clang that echoes across the scene. Light looks on in subdued glee and superiority, and then, boom. The jump scare of this haunting expression, one that so scarily betrays the soul that has vanished from Naomi's eyes, is why I prefer this death over the manga. In this version, Naomi didn't even get to ask what Light meant when he said he was Kira. Here, her soul is already gone. The change was so sudden that once the ball started rolling, it couldn't be stopped. Naomi's animation is now lifeless and robotic as her possessed body goes off to do the unthinkable, and seeing Light's gleeful face taunt her as she walks away is so damn creepy. The voice acting was also flawless. Not only is Brad giving this amazingly slimy performance that makes you detest Light for the heartless monster he has become, but Tabitha, who once made Naomi sound so passionate and vulnerable in previous episodes, now sounds lifeless and hollow. She speaks and mumbles like a wandering ghost, perfectly capturing the helplessly cruel fate of Naomi's character.
So do I. It's odd that you say that because that's exactly what I've been thinking. It probably would, but he's no longer alive. He was one of the 12 FBI agents who came to Japan to investigate Kira. There's something I have to do. No, thank you. I have nothing to say to him.
And the music, my god, the music. The score is not this grand and epic wave of noise that's meant to give otherworldly passion like the other deaths, but instead it's slow, melancholy, and deeply unsettling. Its sound completely encapsulates that sense of horrible realization that washes over you like an icy cold hug, where every string adds more to the chilling tragedy that is occurring before your very eyes. That last note is just... it's so creepy. In short, I believe that this show took the creepy death in the manga and made it absolute perfection. Death Note's anime, like I've said before, takes full advantage of being an animated show. Only in a show can you execute this kind of shot to such great effect. Only in a show can the sounds play such a big role that winds down to a helpless violin chord as the end card suddenly appears to symbolize the conclusion of such a horrifying scene. Episode 7 of Death Note is a piece of TV art, and this small arc revolving around Naomi stands as one of the most gripping, intense, and satisfying pieces of television that I have ever watched. Taking out the scene of Ukita having to deal with Kira imposters, since I guess the writers found that scene got in the way of the actual investigation, L and the boys are on the track of finding out what happened to Ray Pember on the day he was killed, all over a bout of mint ice cream. One thing that you might already know about L was his quirky eating habits, and in the manga, his choices of sweet foods was something that became more of a thing as the story went on. However, in the anime, that trait of L's is there from the start, the first sign being him putting way too much sugar into his coffee in the last episode. This attention and dedication to that part of L is something I respect the animators for emphasizing. It definitely breaks up the monotony of characters talking in a room, and it leads to some pretty funny scenes that weren't in the original manga. Like Soichiro getting 3 scoops of ice cream is something that's so pointless, but it's so heartfelt that I can't help but love it. Also, fuck me, everyone in that scene looks like death, Aizawa especially. What a shot to start the scene on. Once Light and Ryuk get done with talking about Light's plan going forward, with this one interaction being an absolute mood with me towards any kind of technology.
I really can't count on you, can I? You got that right.
L gets the news of Naomi Misura's fate after giving the best normal sounding performance I think I've ever heard, and drops the name of a case that I'm sure would make an excellent book. The anime taking out the entire other person from the call, and L immediately goes to talk to the others. I'll be honest, this is one of the few changes that I'm not really a big fan of, as I think it humanizes L just a tad bit, but on the other hand I can see why the conversation was cut down to just a few lines, cause you know, it helps the plot move along in a much faster manner, that's for sure. Yeah, you don't really hear as many inner monologues in the anime as you do in the manga. For some sagas that's fine, in others it's... oh boy. Also, the anime is back to doing the whole putting scenes in different places kind of spiel. And with the scene of Light disposing his porn and being good at sewing, Ryuk turns his sophisticated jab at Light's skill with sewing into something a lot more raunchy in the anime.
It seems like you're pretty skilled with your hands. I bet you're pretty popular with the girls, aren't you?
And after Light's brutal roast back at him, Ryuk lets out the most honest-to-God, broken-hearted, utterly betrayed, completely devastated, mentally broken, most pathetically whimpered, huh, I've ever heard a character utter.
I'm guessing you're not that popular, are you?
Huh?
Brian, I don't know how much they paid you to be Ryuk in Death Note, but I think you deserve more. Holy fuck, you are a legend. But the scene of L violating so many laws in one fell swoop comes to fruition, with the anime putting a little more focus on Soichiro's discomfort with having his family being spied on. The arc of Light being under surveillance begins, where the anime sticks quite firmly to the manga's material, albeit with some small interactions between L and Soichiro being taken out, and Ryuk talking with more copyright-friendly guidelines.
How's it going? I don't think anyone else is in the house right now. Do you want to play some video games?
The anime also steps up to Ryuk trying to get Light's attention, and just the way Brian acts along with the animation is so funny. That fucking yoo-hoo along with him waving his spindly body gets me every time. The whole scene of Light explaining how he knows his room was fucked with leads to Ryuk dropping a funny response, all courtesy to Brian's dry delivery.
Maybe it was your mother.
And the anime takes full advantage of the medium by exaggerating parts of Ryuk getting worried about not getting any apples. The anime might not be as funny as the manga at times, but when it's funnier, it can be a delight. Once we see Ryuk looking over some human assets where the animators decided to render the absolute shit out of his outline, the anime takes some time to adapt the manga one-to-one fairly faithfully, and after we get the joys of seeing Ryuk looking around the room like some kind of deformed spider, we get the scene of the family eating where Sayu watches Hideki Ryuga on the TV, where the anime changed it from a music program to a soap opera, which I'm sure the actors playing the characters on the TV were having a field day with being corny as fuck. But longtime Death Note fans know of this episode for one specific reason, for it contains a scene so iconic, so artsy, so balls to the wall insane, that it's landed itself in the history of famously over-the-top scenes in all of anime. Ladies and gentlemen, this episode is the one that contains this scene.
I'll show you, L. Just watch me, L. I'll solve equations with my right hand and write names with my left. I'll take a potato chip and eat it.
I mean, what can I say about this moment that hasn't already been said by people for years? Everything is just perfection. Having Light be so overdramatic by barely containing his laughter, the anime using these very rendered shots to show the intensity of Light's plan, having his actual eating of the potato chip be done so intensely with that hilarious cut of him looking completely normal with Brad saying the line with so much conviction as the score reaches its mighty orchestral climax, all while the anime adds in Ryuk getting his withdrawal symptoms at the same time with his power play, and cuts to him right after Light eats a potato chip. It's just perfection, I'm sorry, like, there's literally nothing wrong with it. No notes, no critiques, nothing. The anime decided to make this scene one of the most iconic moments in the story, and I am completely for it. They went so hard for no fucking reason. And you know what? This is how you do it. This is how you do it. After having such a unnecessarily high ending, this episode was a fantastic watch. It both captured the brilliantly grounded realism Death Note is known for, while also allowing itself to indulge in the over-the-top nature that only the anime medium can provide. It was a great time, and the haunting choir being heard as Light bins the evidence away and the TV slowly gets crushed in a garbage truck all feels like a solid victory, with Light coming off as invincible towards the all-knowing eyes of L. Once the anime allows itself to remind you of the peak moments from the last episode, because why wouldn't it, it dives straight into the story of Chapter 18 and plays by the book quite thoroughly. And when I say thoroughly, I mean that the anime actually doesn't do anything different whatsoever for the entire first half. In terms of pacing, this is the most one-to-one the anime has been to the manga thus far, and like the manga, this story is still a really good one. Getting to see Ryuk's withdrawals animated and the occasional reminder that only Light can see him is always a treat, and like usual, Brian is killing it with his performance, further proving that he was such a lucky casting. The introspection and thinking scenes and their primary colors are also back in full swing, with the show really indulging in making everything look more artsy and more intense than the manga's black and white pages. But it isn't too perfectly in line, as after the ad break, the anime puts in the scene of the Shinigami making fun of Ryuk's predicament in chapter 20, and puts it here. And to be honest, given all that's happened throughout this episode and the last one, having this scene be put here instead of after Light and L meeting makes a good bit of sense to me. Though it does make the whole Light shouting at Ryuk at the end of chapter 19 a little less impactful, since he was kind of shouting at him like how an owner shouts at their dog, but hey, it's only a very small sacrifice to make the story more engaging. Though after that, episode 9 is right back to being very on the rails with its adaptation. The only small difference I can think of being when L and Light talk after the ceremony speech and L confesses to who he is to Light, they do it while sitting down rather than standing like in the manga. I think it makes more sense for them to do this, since not only would them just standing there for ages look a little weird in animation, but I'm sure the animators were more than happy to cut down on standing shots and walking animations and just have the characters sit. As an artist, big mood. Also, the way that Alessandro delivered the I am L line through a harsh whisper and the anime transitions to just the two of them through the colors is just mwah. Peak voice acting and animation storytelling.
That kid must come from some serious money. Plus, he's at the top of the class. Where's the justice?
Where is the justice? That would make for a good song title, to be honest. Light's whole blow-up and monologue at the end was also amazing to listen to. Brad's voice being able to go from harsh and loud, smooth and calm, to commanding and level-headed in just under a few minutes. Brad is literally just the perfect voice for Light. That man has goddamn range. The animation is also just peak whenever Light freaks out. But aside from that tiny change to their first interaction, I don't have much else to say. This episode is all around very faithful, and through it, it managed to perfectly capture the spirit of these two chapters, making it all the more interesting to see the execution going forward. The anime, however, couldn't resist its methods too long over the manga, as during the scenes of Light and L playing their tennis match and Soichiro talking to his boss, the two scenes are played in between each other, the Soichiro scene being used to kickstart the tennis match rather than being after it. A small change that I feel was a good call, since not only does it make for a nice transition, but it also adds a bit of comedy towards the intensity of the match, which itself is just Like the potato chip scene, I can't think I can add that much commentary that hasn't been done before. This scene, one that was already pretty funny in the manga, is a complete spectacle in the anime. Either way, it is just absolute cinema. And after the anime changes their interaction after the game to an empty campus ground rather than a tennis court for both privacy and visually appealing reasons, they finally get to chatting one-on-one. A transition that I believe was better than the original placement of the manga of this being after the Soichiro scene, given the naturality of the two talking during these two scenes. One thing about their talk I thought was interesting was that the anime only had L test Light on the 3 notes that made the whole Gods of Death love apples bit, but in the manga, L also gave Light the FBI names along with asking him about how L's reveal to him told him anything. And while it makes the whole Light talks a lot line a bit less impactful, I actually didn't mind this more streamlined obsession too much, as at the end of the day, the whole game surrounding the notes was the most damning part of their conversation. The main point that the scene was trying to get across is still remarkably intact, all things considered, which transitions nicely to the two getting the news of Soichiro's heart attack, a nice echoing tick ending the scene on an ad break that's definitely one of the better ad breaks so far. Though the adaptation of the hospital scene compared to the manga is the one time where I will say that the anime version is actually a bit weaker. In the manga, this whole scene was a great way to not just get more information across to Light, but it also shows that L is willing to come to any logical conclusion or say something out of pocket to try and get a reaction, regardless of how ruthless it may be. Like with him accusing Sayu of being Kira after Light gave him his view on Kira, a view similar to his own and a scene that wasn't in the anime, and straight up telling Soichiro that his suspicions of Light are higher than before, not mincing any of his words as he does so. In the anime, no such scenes exist. All we get is a rundown of the FBI murders and the brief moments of Light caring for his dad. His mom doesn't even get a bit of screen time with her family, she just leaves the moment the scene starts. While I understand that these moments were cut out due to possible time restraints, I don't know, I just wasn't as invested in this scene as I was with the manga, which, to be honest, I think shouldn't have happened, given that this scene did a lot of characterization for the people in this moment. It's a little disappointing if I'm being honest. Quick little intervention here, because a friend pointed out something that I just never noticed before. The FBI agents were never mentioned in the last scene because it actually had a reason. During the hospital scene, L tells Light that there were FBI agents in Japan and mentioned Ray Pember in passing by saying that he was trailing people connected to the police, saying he showed unusual behavior before he died. Light then responds by saying that he understands that he was one of the people Ray was chasing before he died, even though L never said who Ray was tracking specifically. And Light giving that kind of answer must have raised L's suspicions of him being Kira by like tenfold. Light did basically exactly what L predicted he was going to do. Like, that was so clever. That was such a subtle change and brilliant slip up that the show added in that I was none the wiser for the past few times I saw it. Props to my friend and this user on YouTube for showcasing it clearly. Like, you guys are smart. And I'm not. The show got me this time. Got me this time. But where I will give the anime credit is that instead of the episode opening and closing with the Sakura TV scenes, like in the manga's 22nd chapter, the anime put both of these moments together at the end, where Demigawa acts like your usual shady businessman, and the Kira tapes are given to him during the initial meeting, rather than afterwards. A change which I think handled the start of the new arc so much better, as the jump between the two stories are not as jarring as before. Also, Demigawa is voiced by Ward Perry, and goddamn does this man know how to make Demigawa sound detestable with every line.
Listen, you people must think that just mentioning Kira's name is enough to get us the ratings we need, huh? Our program gets the ratings because we cover the stories that the other stations won't touch. If it bleeds, it leads. Idiot! I don't pay you to complain. If they won't give you anything, then get creative!
It's such lovely, disgusting sliminess. After the episode opens with Light and Ryuk silently standing in Light's room, which maybe was a subtle callback to that one scene of Light dealing with his fame from chapter 3 that I mentioned before, the story of the fake Kira goes off in full swing. And I gotta say, I do admire the subtle changes made here. Rather than Sakura TV being this very high value looking show that has fancy presentation like in the manga, the anime makes it look more amateur and rushed, doubling down on the station being something that can't really be trusted, with even the music sounding like it was made in a few minutes. I swear, that annoying looping melody of the station is just a cherry on top. I love it. Gotta love Sakura TV being a scam. Just makes Demigamo look so fucking cheap. But as the first Kira tape begins and a really creepy build-up with the music going away suddenly as the tape plays, the voice of this fake Kira is heard, and call me a wuss all you want, but good god, I actually think it's quite unsettling.
I am Kira. This video was being aired on April 18th at exactly 5:59 PM as I requested.
And with the show using the sudden cuts to other TV channels to show the lifeless bodies of the newest victims also gave this scene a near horror movie kind of tone. Something about the TV channels changing and all that pops up as a lifeless form with people panicking in the background just made my skin crawl the first time I saw it. It certainly was a lot creepier than the manga. Also, getting to see Ukita's death and watching just how violently L is shaking with his Kira theory now crashing and burning around him was extremely engaging. The anime just loves to take moments like these from the manga and multiply their effect tenfold. Soichiro being a badass was as great as ever also, with his voice actor Chris Brighton sounding like an unstoppable force of nature.
This is the police. Stop this broadcast immediately. Hand those tapes over to me. Do you understand? Shut up! You're gonna be killed right here and now if you don't give those tapes to me. This is happening because you chose to make Kira a celebrity. I want every single copy you have, and don't make me ask you again.
That's what I'm talking about! That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
Watching Demigawa squirming animated is always a treat. And like episode 9, episode 10 is an extremely rigid adaptation of these 3 chapters. Literally every scene was played almost exactly like it was in the manga, which I think did a very good job at adapting all things considered. All of the big moments were still there and have their flair, the tension was as great as ever with there being one very long shot of Soichiro coming out of the Sakura TV station, and the episode ending on a gloriously creepy shot of Mikasa, that's a different show, you idiot. And the episode ending on a gloriously creepy shot of Misa's Shinigami eyes that we see for the very first time makes this another certified banger of an episode. This episode is also the first time we get to hear the voices of Rem, played by Colleen Wheeler, and Misa, played by Sharon Chan Kent. Fun facts about Rem. When recording the lines, Colleen was asked by Carl to emulate the Japanese voice as closely as possible, which is why their performances sound so similar. In an interview, she paid respect to the original voice actor, calling their voice beautiful.
They played for me the original actor who had a beautiful voice, or has a beautiful voice, the Japanese actor that voiced Rem, and they wanted me to somewhat emulate that.
She also talks about how reserved she had to be all the time since Rem wasn't an expressive character, with Carl even referring the toning down of the performance as making it sound more Rem-like. She also had this lovely thing to say about angels when discussing one of the reasons she likes Rem.
For me, personally, I believe that, we do have angels in our lives, right? We just can't see them. And Rem, to me, is an angel that takes care of Misa.
Now ain't that just sweet? Moving on to Shannon, she actually started voice acting when she was only 14 years old, saying that the first 2 roles she got were ones she booked herself. She came from a family of performers, but decided that she would try and make it into her career, and considering that she's still getting roles to this day, I'm happy she's doing great for herself. When she got the role and was able to record, Shannon was surprised on how bubbly Misa actually was in the story, because during the audition, she was only given a more intense scene. She thought Misa's actual personality was a pleasant surprise, given their similarities to each other, and she grew to really like the character. She did have a bit of trouble with her performance at times, and she actually went and watched the Japanese dub before recording, saying that she was inspired by the higher pitch of Misa's Japanese voice, and given that in the past Shannon had played a lot of Barbie-esque little girl characters, it took some time for her to get the performance to sound more grounded, mature, and internal. Death Note was also the first time where she voiced in a more adult cartoon, so the transition must have been a bit of a challenge, but she still nailed it in my opinion. She also had some nice words to say about Carl, who she says was very supportive of her even during some of the harder scenes. Also in one interview, Shannon had this to say about Light and Misa's relationship, and it's just...
I think in the beginning it's an infatuation, but I think as the series goes on, she'll maybe kind of figure out that he's using her, or he could just fall in love with her because she is so bubbly.
Shannon, you sweet summer child, I wish you were right. Also, funny little fun fact, Alessandro has jokingly said at a con that if given the choice, he would have wanted to play Misa.
If I could be anyone, it would be fun to be Misa. Oh my god, it's so much fun. You just little, like a pop star. Come on.
God, this man is a treasure. With the anime giving itself a pat on the back of adapting the last episode with no real changes to pacing, it decides to treat itself by rearranging the opening scenes of chapter 26 so that the tension of Light coming in can have more impact. It was an interesting choice to open up the episode with Light getting called in, and then we get the reasons as to why in a flashback. It makes the test a lot more engaging. Also, this line,
"This video is so mediocre, it's making me sick to my stomach."
Big mood. However, aside from there being one scene of Mogi getting the reply to L's trap being taken out, the anime keeps on the rails once again. Though I will say that L's reaction to the possible existence of Shinigami was done way better here than before. Hearing his voice be so expressive after 11 episodes of him being quite reserved was quite the shock, and Alessandro killed it with making him sound fucking terrified. The man's talent truly cannot be understated. One small detail I also like was that it does take a little while for L to compose himself, whereas in the manga, he was back almost instantly. This more realistic approach to recovering from fright makes him look way more human, which I really like. But this episode does something else that I really like, which is how they introduced Misa Amane. In the manga, her face was kept hidden until we finally see her in chapter 7 casually talking to Rem about killing Shinigami. But in the anime, Misa is seen doing a model shoot where I'm sure the animators had a lot of fun drawing her in all those outfits, and after her being tuckered out from working, she pipes up to talk to Rem. Through this one scene, I feel like the show does much better at establishing what kind of character Misa is. In the manga, her face reveal was just kind of underwhelming, but here, I like how we get a glimpse into her fashion side since it will play a big part later on, and her being tuckered out after the work and seeing Rem's unamused face was a funny little moment between the two. I think these little additions did wonders at making Misa and Rem into their own characters. It's good stuff. And the way the anime adapted Jealous's death was extremely beautiful. Everything from the sad and swaying music, Rem's beautiful and tender voice narrating the story, the sporadic and fast animation that showcases just how fast Jealous's decision to sacrifice himself was made, and the voice acting from everyone inside, including the stalker and Jealous, and seeing him turn into sparkles before his eyes vanish and his body rots away rapidly. It was all around a very good scene. In the dub, Jealous was voiced by Michael Dobson, and despite having very few lines, he sold it wonderfully. And in an alternate timeline, that voice could have been Brad. I'm not kidding, by the way. During an interview at a 2023 con, when asked about which character they would choose to play if they had the choice, Brad said that he would have done Jealous.
I kind of liked Jealous, the weird-looking little Shinigami at the beginning of the show who has a relatively small part, but that'd be kind of fun.
Now isn't that pretty neat? But after the story ends and Misa and Rem talk a little bit more with Misa's attempts to expose Rem's gayness not following through, the episode ends with Light considering his new predicament in a scene that has him alone at a cafe seething and not being in his room when considering his options, all while Misa eats a strawberry sundae, not even a few minutes away. I always liked this small change not just because of the way it shows that both of them are closer to each other than they even realize, but the way that the show managed to represent them having two entirely different perspectives on the situation, with Light's being more dread-filled while Misa is more whimsical, making it very charming and engaging to watch. It leaves the episode on a very nice note, and with the next episode, we're only gonna get some more anime goodness. Episode 13 picks off from the last scene of chapter 27, and like the ending of the last episode, it changed up the environment to make the start more visually appealing. I think this is the only time where the anime splits one scene into two different episodes, and given how natural it was, I wouldn't have realized if I didn't have the manga alongside me as I was watching it. Every day I'm more and more impressed with the writers adapting this work with creative differences and yet still managing to be respectful and even improving upon the original without too many blunders. It's really tight writing. And with the only big changes being the date of the diary being changed from 2003 to 2006 in the anime, the adaptation cutting out L's borderline paranoid analysis of Light when he agrees to go to Ayama with Matsuda to find Kira, Misa's undergarments not being acknowledged by the family, and Light not berating Misa for killing innocent people, which I personally think is much better since it plays into Light's manipulation a lot harder and faster, this one is a fairly straight one-to-one adaptation, though I do find it nice that they played the ending theme in the background while Misa was looking up Light.
Oh, it's written as moon, but read as light. Light Yagami.
That's a cute little detail. I got nothing else to say except, yeah, this one was very solid as well. And the final shot that pays homage to that glorious panel of Light hugging Misa was a great way to get me hooked, towards the next episode. Great performances and great animation all around.
Thanks.
I guess the people behind Death Note thought that these 2 chapters were perfect on their own, because besides trimming down some of the dialogue heavy scenes and how Misa finds life, this one had no changes at all. What you get in the manga is given to you in that beautiful anime look, with even Light's misogyny coming with one of Brad's most venomous line deliveries.
This is the first time in my life that I've been provoked to hit a woman.
Based. Look, I get to do this joke once, alright? Some of y'all gave me shit last time, so this'll be the compromise. I only do it once. If you guys start fucking complaining, I will double down on it. I'm not kidding. And the scene involving L hoping that Light isn't Kira because he sees Light as a friend, and the interaction they have after that confession, one of my favorite scenes from the manga, was handled very well here, all because of the pacing and the voice actors selling every line to perfection. To be a bit honest for a second, I feel like all the research I did on Death Note kind of ruined this scene for me, since I now know that Oba wrote L with the intention that any of these lines was just him bullshitting. Because good lord, if I didn't have this information, I genuinely would have had such a hard time telling if L meant what he said at this moment. And many moments after this. Alessandro's delivery and the animation softening up his features is just that good. You certainly wouldn't be stupid if you believed L. Not at all. I also found it cute that considering that calling someone by their first name doesn't mean anything in the Western world, the anime changed Misa calling Light by his first name to just Darling, since Darling would be the rough Western equivalent to the first name basis in Japan. That's something that is so small, and yet I can't help but find cool that the writers were aware and worked around the cultural differences the West and the East have. That attention to detail is always very good. But yeah, good shit all around. Let's keep going. Once the anime does admittedly a darkly funny recap,
I feel you're the first friend that I have ever had.
Misa, then could you ask Rem to kill L?
God, Light, you monster. We're straight into the meats of chapters 32 and 33, and as Light's misogyny grows the more Misa is around him, after what feels like a good while now, the anime decides to add in its own spin on the scene of Light declaring the death of L, with a more artsy depiction of the battle he and L are fighting, with the two standing on buildings miles apart from one another. Going from the visuals alone, you can interpret this a few different ways, and the way I personally see it is that Light, having a strong and vindicated sense of justice to the point of arrogance, stands tall and proud, but even through his mighty hubris, off in the distance, L is still a problem. Despite the possibility of being no longer an issue for Light and being on shaky ground due to a lack of evidence against him, represented by a much thinner building he stands on, L is still the stubborn obstacle that Light has to acknowledge as a legitimate threat to his pursuit of godhood. The two may be on different grounds, but their battle still wages on. A battle visually executed quite nicely, thanks to the anime getting its creative spark back. It's nice to see it make a return after so long in such a cool way. Massive respect to the team who animated this and making such a beautiful transition back to the grounded drama we all know and love. And it was great to see L make his own declaration of war, where the anime does its own spin again by having L stand on a small platform with only a small fence to prevent him falling off. The ground he stands on getting smaller and more dangerous the more risks he takes to catch Kira, the danger of falling off and dying becoming more and more apparent. Seriously, these new additions are such a beautiful treat, and the way it manages to visually represent the stakes and not just be an aesthetic choice was something that makes the anime such a spectacle to watch. Almost nothing goes to waste, it's so awesome. But the anime goes back to being a faithful adaptation, and after seeing L give the most in-character reunion with Light,
Hey, Light! How's it going?
God, that was perfection. The two have a pleasantly sinister chat, and my god, just this exchange. I can't get over just how natural everyone sounds. The tightness of these conversations are spot on. The next scene is also a beautiful adaptation, with the inner colors coming back when Light thinks he's one with Misa, only for L to be cast in this sickly blue fire as he just silently laughs to himself. Light being so paranoid on what the laughing means. It makes the scene in the reveal that much funnier, and the crowd scene afterwards was also really good. The scene getting a good few laughs out of me. But after some lighthearted fun, the anime perfectly represents Light's sheer euphoria as he savors the idea that L is going to die, visually represented by slow motion and the great use of the ad break, all for it to come crashing down as the phone rings behind him, L revealing he has it in a way that I think was so much better than how it was handled in the manga. In the manga, there was a panel where L snatched it out of his pocket in an exaggerated manner the moment it started ringing, with the manga even giving you a bit of insight into what L is thinking before he answers the phone. But in the anime, the ringtone, which I think is the ending again, but I could be wrong, plays and Light turns around and it's just a hard cut to L holding it out, his inner monologue being gone entirely. This, and combined with the way the anime cuts back and forth and landing on this shot of L before he answers it, just makes his moves so much more threatening. Not to mention that the whole time, Alessandro is giving the most laid-back and casual performance that sounds so horrifyingly real that you could have told me he was just being recorded having a random phone call and I would believe you. God, he's such a good actor. And with the reveal of L arresting Misa under the pretenses of her being the second Kira, the anime takes L's speech in the 2 panels of Light kicking himself about disposing the evidence, and turns it into a full-on artsy display of their battle, with the anime going back to the 2 on their buildings, this time closer than ever. Light is visually represented as to have almost lost the battle by falling off his stable platform into the abyss, only to stop mid-fall, taking L by surprise, and declaring that the fight isn't over yet. Even if these scenes were done just with the goal of making this anime more appealing to watch, the fact that the show even goes to these lengths to make this battle feel so much more epic is something I will always respect. Death Note thrives as a story when it allows itself to delve into the abstract, and seeing the anime depict the two's battle through such striking and yet subtle imagery, so that you can really sink your teeth into it if you try and find some meaning, makes it all just so much more rewarding to watch. Every time they do this, I love it. Good stuff. And with Misa captured and being tortured, the anime makes more changes to the manga's pacing, so that more focus is actually put onto Rem and her trying to console Misa on her horrible situation. Colleen's more calm but warm voice was lovely to listen to, and the anime adding in this small scene of her fixing Misa's hair, a detail L saw but doesn't pay too much mind to, was such a great way for the supernatural elements of Death Note to start merging more with the real world. I always liked this adaptation of Misa losing the eyes, as not only does it feel more emotional and makes Rem look like a very supportive character, but it's a massive upgrade from the fate of Misa being just dedicated to a few panels of dialogue inside Light's room, with the anime even having Light pick up on what Rem did and not being surprised at the outcome like he was before. Plus, it's also nice to have people just care about Misa, you know? Like, I've said this before in the manga, but you know, at this point she was being tortured for days on end, she just kind of deserves a break. This episode was by far one of the most artsy so far, and with this new art direction comes new possibilities for the show to get super creative with how they execute the story, and trust me, the changes they make down the line are going to be mostly on par and even better than this one. I can say with confidence that this anime took the main plot beats from these 2 chapters and turned them into something truly wonderful and different. Full marks all around. Episode 16 adds in more characterization for Rem, with her making sure that Light keeps his word before she flies off. The anime adding in a small scene of Misa regaining consciousness, which makes her sudden change in attitude a lot creepier to see. And after that, the story is back to being more of an on-rail adaptation. However, the show's creative flair hasn't fully snuffed out, as during one of L's monologues when he hears Light's suggestion of containing him in solitary confinement to prove his innocence, along with the very harsh blue color enveloping L like before, there's a very nice shot of his reflection talking while his actual mouth stays firmly shut, to fully encapsulate L's inner voice. This is such a small and basic thing to do, but it's just such a cool addition to the show that I don't care. This kind of stuff just makes for a fantastic visual. But aside from that, Chapter 34 is pretty much by the book, and Chapter 35 is a bit more flair, with L having his monologue about criminals not being killed the moment Light was detained, where instead of some basic shots accompanied by walls of text, the anime has him watching over Light in his cage in a more artistic way. The shots make it look like L is an all-seeing being with complete control of the situation, but as L's eyes become larger, closer, and more focused as the shots progress, it visually represents how much he's desperately trying to find an answer to a riddle that Light has made more and more complicated. Everything is there, but it doesn't add up. So what's going on? Also, getting to see Ryuk have his withdrawal spasms are a joy to see as usual. I also have to give the anime props for perfectly capturing the sheer mental toll that the confinement is taking on Soichiro, and seeing him go up close to the camera and it glitching out slightly from the forest as he declares that he won't be leaving unless it's with his son was so well done. Seeing L's face just be blank after that declaration was slightly cathartic, to be entirely honest. Chris Brighton is just absolutely killing this role, and if you think he's great now, ooh, boy, you're in for a treat. As the episode goes on, Light gives up his ownership of the Death Note through the series of very interesting dramatic shots that make it feel a lot more intense. And when Ryuk leaves and you see his eyes go back to what they were like in episode 1, hearing Brad's voice being so much more expressive and sincere thanks to Light's memories being wiped, it was no wonder why L was so confused on what to think. The performance that Brad is giving to Light sounds so real, and seeing L get more and more frustrated was just so good to see. The anime nailed this scene through and through, ending on another great cliffhanger. And so with that, on to the next episode. This episode contains what I think is the greatest example of not just the anime making a manga scene better, but a scene that stands to me as one of the greatest dubbings in anime history. After the anime gives all the dialogue to Rem instead of the manga having her and Hikuchi talk to one another, which I think was a great choice given that a voice would have immediately given away the reveal of the new Kira, we're straight back into the action of chapter 36, where Aizawa, played by Trevor Duvall, does a splendid job ripping into L, and once L's pride is finally beaten down, the anime starts its adaptation of L's, arguably, most fucked up plan. As much as I would love to play the full scene uninterrupted because it is just that good of a scene, I don't want to get sniped by copyright, so I'll just go through it scene by scene. The adaptation begins with L's theme playing over him discussing the plan with Soichiro, with the show audibly giving you the obvious fact that L is in complete control. The animation on Soichiro's face as it contorts into a look of horror being so stellarly done. So fucking beautiful. Then after the anime makes Soichiro more restrained with Misa's accusations of him being a stalker than it was in the manga, he meets Aizawa who is with Light, and rather than both of them getting in the car immediately, they all have a small chat before Soichiro commands that his son and Misa get in the car. Then, on the way to the quote-unquote execution site, the performances all three actors give is nothing short of flawless. Then after a not so clean stop into an abandoned area that was way cleaner than in the manga, the actors keep giving it their all as Soichiro pulls out a gun and goes through what the two believe to be their execution, and right before he pulls the trigger, Chris drops the coldest line that I think a fictional character has ever said.
Light, my son. From one murderer to another, I'll see you in hell.
And as he pulls the trigger, Misa lets out one more terrified scream, and a deafening gunshot echoes out as the anime cuts to the ad break. There is so much about this one scene that makes it so memorable for me. Firstly, the animation. From the sporadic movements, dynamic camera angles, and the super intense colors that bathe them all in a boiling orange and then a hellish shade of purple, the visuals of the scene were absolutely spot on at capturing a scene where you genuinely think that Light and Misa were going to die. That shot of Soichiro's eyes that looked like a man ready to kill was bone-chilling to see. Then there is the music. Using both the L theme and then Ryuk's theme, a sense of otherworldly dread practically drowns this moment. The soundtrack giving you this horrible sense of helplessness as there's seemingly nothing that Light and Misa can do to escape their situation. The ethereally dark music that the anime usually saves for death scenes was a splendidly subtle touch, and hearing the horrible heartbeat over and over as Light tries to rationalize everything, the same heartbeat that's heard when his previous victims died of heart attacks, was an addition that did nothing but elevate that sense of panic. But above all, it's the voice acting that sells this scene. Like I said before, everyone is giving this scene their absolute best. Brad's panicked shouting that sounds both like a man trying to escape his fate and like a child begging for forgiveness and mercy from his dad. Sharon's cries of hysteria as Misa says anything she can to avoid their deaths, regardless of the actual material of the threats. And Chris's mock calmness and chilling venomous tone when telling the both of them of what's gonna happen sent waves and waves of chills down my spine as the scene kept getting more and more and more intense. And then that line, "Light my son, from one murderer to another, I'll see you in hell." I don't know who wrote this line. I don't know where in their brain they found that combination of words and gave Chris the perfect direction to sell it with so much conviction, but whoever wrote that line, I hope your pillow is cold for the rest of your life. It is just such a cold line. It is such a massive improvement over the line, "Light, we're both murderers, we'll see each other in hell," that was in the manga. And Chris's almost rage-filled delivery of this line was nothing short of perfect. Because even under the rage, you can just hear how much it hurts Soichiro to pretend like he's going to murder his own son. You can just tell that Soichiro is both heartbroken at the fact that he knows his son believes that he's gonna kill him in this moment, and he absolutely despises L for making him do something so horrible. That gunshot practically taking all of the wind out of me when I heard it. This scene was just... holy shit. It is a masterclass of anime storytelling, and the voice actors deserve all the credit in the world for elevating this moment to near godlike status. I've seen this scene God knows how many times, and without fail, it manages to get me every single time. The adaptation just didn't hold back when it came to scenes like this, and I am so glad they didn't. What a fucking incredible moment. And the scene afterward of Elle basically going, "Haha, pranked you bro, look, there's the camera," was wonderfully done as well. Light's eyes having some tears as he draws back, something he didn't have in the manga, was a very good touch that I think did great at showcasing just how scared he was about dying to the hands of his father. Even though realistically, even if he was shot with a blank, it would still leave Light with some severe injuries, but hey, drama is drama, let's not get too nitpicky about this. Also getting to hear the sheer relief wash over Soichiro as he practically passes out on the wheel of the car was just... God, Chris is such a phenomenal actor. And with that glorious scene perfectly animated, the anime holds back for the rest of the episode, besides playing into the usual anime tropes in that one scene that was basically written to not be taken too seriously. I will say the more exaggerated animation and the voice actors being allowed to be more expressive was a pleasant time. The whole moment of Aizawa kicking Misa out of the room in a more cartoony way was a nice and cute scene. But as the clouds vortex around the Yotsuba building, we get our first glimpse at the top dogs, the room filled with this harsh red and yellow light that bathes them all in this horrible heated palette as they casually discuss the next person they're going to kill. The episode ending with Rem dropping a line that was delivered with so much disgust and disdain. From its perfect sound design and roller coaster-like thrills, episode 17 is fantastic. It was such an incredible experience, and the way it calmed down with some lighthearted comedy after what feels like an eternity solidified this episode as one of Death Note's best. No critiques, no notes, nothing. Just pure and unfiltered perfection. With this episode being more of a bridge between events, the stakes in this one are kept relatively low, but that doesn't stop the anime from doing what it does best by adapting the scenes that matter to get the necessary emotional beats to land. L being depressed and the sheer disappointment he has at Light not being Kira was as funny as ever, with Alessandro really selling the no fucks given attitude of L.
No, please, just pretend I'm not even here, okay? Actually, I found that you don't gain any weight as long as you burn calories by using your brain.
Bobby?
You can call me whatever you like. Last chance for cake. You're right. Actually, I'm depressed.
And the comedic bits like the fight and Aizawa stripping down to get into the building were quite funny to watch. Admittedly, I found the whole scene of Rem and Higuchi talking being taken out of the anime to be a bit of a shame, since that scene did help dip into the world's response to Kira a bit more, and we could get more of a look into Higuchi's character through that. But again, the voice would have given it away, so you know, I see why they kept it out. And like some episodes previously, this one cut down a lot of scenes to just a few lines, like the conversation between Yatsuba, Soichiro talking to his boss and quitting the MPA, and the scenes of Light, L, and Soichiro doing research into Yatsuba. This one has definitely the least amount of fat so far, but despite the manga's story being almost stripped to the bone, the marrow that was the emotional beats for characters like Aizawa was still intact and done wonderfully. Seriously, the whole scene with Aizawa and his kid is just, god, it's so fucking heartbreaking. All done so much better because Trevor is such a good actor. Which transitions to just a single fun fact that I would like to give you about Trevor Duvall himself. He was the voice of Dookie the dog from Johnny Test. Yes, that Dookie from that Johnny Test. This man has range, holy shit. We even get a small scene with Matsuda asking L what he can do to be useful, which wasn't in the manga, which leads to this funny interaction.
So you really want to be useful?
Yes!
Then could you get me another cup of coffee?
What the fuck, L, you bastard. But once we're introduced to Aiber and Wedi, the Yatsuba arc can truly begin. Being a Matsuda-focused episode, this one has a pretty funny opening, calling back to times where Matsuda was berated and being told off, and after a collage of characters looking hilariously evil, Matsuda makes his intentions clear, to prove that he's worthy of being here. And with another flashing of scenes berating our favorite goofball, Matsuda heads straight for the Yatsuba building, this time disappearing without a trace, rather than running off after asking Misa how long they would be staying out. Also in the acting scene, Misa's outfit was changed from casual clothing to a wedding gown. I guess the animators wanted to make Misa hot, which is based, I mean, yeah, fair enough. But before Matsuda can be a badass, Light's reminiscing of past events goes from him going in depth with his thoughts in the manga to just a few seconds of him pondering his moral orb, and L interrupts him with a more lighthearted exchange than the one in the manga.
What's wrong? You've been staring at me for the last 2 minutes. Wait, let me guess. You must be annoyed because I'm the only one eating cake at the moment, am I right?
No, that's not it.
Here.
Really, don't worry about it.
And look, I know I said before that I'm aware of the author's intentions when it came to Light and L's friendship, but come on, you can't tell me the small exchange was just business-like. L sounded way too keen to share his food. They also cut out L's slight jab at Light for hacking into the Yatsuba security group by insinuating that he could have hacked into the police system, a not-so-subtle reminder that L is still a bit bitter about Light not being Kira. At least not anymore. And to be honest, this was a moment that, while funny, is understandable for me as to why they left it out. But after the fake reveal of Araldo Coil and L doing a funny threat, which Mogi takes in good spirits, being played first, the story jumps forward to Matsuda's break-in of the Yatsuba building. A scene that pays great service to the manga. And for the moments relating to Matsuda getting caught, Misa being hired, the Yatsuba party, and Matsuda faking his death, the anime takes the same story and rearranges everything. An order that if I were to go into detail, you might get lost, but to put it simply, the anime did it in a way that the story can be put into one clear, overarching narrative, cutting out as much filler as possible, and making it so that the tension and the highlights of each scene are done with not just efficiency, but done so that the episode can reach a solid runtime and end on a good spot. Matsuda also gets his own unique color scheme when he has his inner monologues, which I think is really neat, and the animation really does represent how fucked he is in the situation he's in. I will say that changing the placement of L's advice of not taking things into their own hands from being before Matsuda being caught to after he's caught makes it not just better drama and stakes, but adds a morbidly funny undertone that Death Note is basically mastered at this point in the show. And the whole scene of Matsuda having to fake his own death to get free from the Yatsuba boys was a very well done scene that works even better given that you're going into it completely blind rather than having a slight idea like in the manga. With this episode being all about Matsuda, I appreciated the anime for giving him as much time as possible to give him a satisfying story of his own, and with his risks getting them a big step forward into the case, the boys can now sit back and watch as the game of Death Note Killer Within begins. With the anime reaching its 20th episode, the studio decided that the opening was getting a bit stale, so they changed it up to something else. For the past 19 episodes, the opening was a song called The World from a band named Nightmare, The song is not only quite good by itself, but in the context of Death Note, it more or less illustrates Light's early philosophy pretty spot on, with lyrics such as, "We exchanged promises of revolution in the expanding darkness. I loved you, so the flower of evil sprouted. I won't let anyone interfere with everything that is to come in the future. A fruit has told me of the future. This city has a forgotten reason. These distorted and black times will change into ideals, into dreams. Why am I a broken messiah? The end that everyone has wished for. One day I will show you the sky that shines with light. Why am I the broken messiah? The paradise that everyone dreamed of." And with the more upbeat melody, the song has this feeling of hope, even idealistic grandeur contained inside it. It captures the warped but more pure intentions that Light had at the beginning of the series, even if the visuals depicted Light as more and more sinister as the opening kept playing. It told a very solid visual story in just 90 seconds that has a very interesting spectacle. All around it's quite good. Intro 2 is, let's just say, nothing like that. Instead of Nighttime's more boy band vocals and upbeat instrumental, What's Up People by Maximum the Hormone, the name of Intro 2's song, is a tune with so much brutality that you'd think you put on the wrong show the first time you heard it. Being the complete opposite to the first opening, the song captures Light's descent into madness perfectly, with the vocals being rapid, intense, overwhelming, and fueled with rage and insanity, with screams being heard for the majority of the opening. And with lyrics like, "We've always been this to feel all this pain," "Convenience, convenience, yeah, human," "See now, isn't it starting to hurt you human," "What's up with the many insecurities, the crime won't stop forever, the grudges trap, who's going down, hey, hey, human sucker, human fucker." If the first intro was a song depicting the story of a misguided hero whose pure intentions will be fulfilled even if it comes at great cost, then the second intro is of a hero who has drowned in his own desire for power and emerges an insane and dangerous villain. One that cares for nobody and nothing and sees the evils of the world not as something to destroy, but to join and revel in, forming the madness into his own image. It's an intro that audibly and visually represents the sheer corruption that Death Note's power has done to Light's morality, and the acid trippy visuals and flashing lights that have no rhyme or reason to them was like watching a psychotic break. And considering I really like metal myself and mental breaks are a big thing I like in fiction, this opening is by far my favorite. God, it is such a banger. If you haven't listened to the full song, go listen to it. It's great as well. Where at the end, the singer screams so much, his voice not only cracks, but he coughs as the music dies off. Now that is a singer with passion. Now that my superior opinion has been established, episode 20 focuses on the Yotsuba group confessing to every crime under the sun, albeit very trimmed down for time management. And after the fact that Kira can kill in ways besides heart attacks is now known, which Light tells L they assumed already, even though we never actually got that scene of them confirming that to be the case like in the manga, besides Light talking about one death involving a fall, so that sentence doesn't make any sense in the anime, just saying. And he and Soichiro get into a fight with L after he says that they should wait to see if the victims actually die, with the anime making a small change to having L's food be a stack of jelly, which the animators probably had some fun animating. Gotta love that pink little cube of jelly. I wonder what that's supposed to visually represent. After taking out one of the few scenes of Matsuda proving he's very intelligent from the manga, which is a big shame, Light manages to successfully get one of the Yotsuba members to work with them, earning L's respect. But, like in the manga, Light sees right through this trap, and after a quick fight that takes directly from his respective panels, the boys split up because L is as stubborn as ever, and L immediately goes to Misa to get a lead, Shannon delivering such a banger performance when she sees him.
Light! I didn't know we were supposed to have a date. Oh right, I should have known.
God, I love this dub. And the whole scene of L playing to Misa's emotions and getting her to go along with his plan, all while Light is desperately trying to get her not to, was both super well adapted besides all the trimmings, and really funny. Most of the comedy coming from just how natural all of the performances sound. Alessandro's both expressive and deadpan deliveries makes L such a fun character for Misa to bounce off of, and always seeing him go back and getting Misa involved to get Light to go on with the plan is just, it was so entertaining. Alessandro's also gone on record saying that this was one of his favorite scenes to voice.
There's this funny little sequence where the three of us are sort of hanging out, and all of a sudden it becomes like a sitcom or some like sort of like Three's Company. Like we're just, in another show they would have just been besties and hung out and played board games and eaten a lot of cake. I love that whole thing because it shows sort of a lighter side.
And I don't blame him. He's having so much fun with this.
Misa Amane, tell me, do you love Light from the bottom of your heart? If you had to choose between Light and Kira, who would you pick? Which is it?
We catch Kira! I would never dream about living in a world without light.
Yes, that would be dark. Misa is indisputably the most perfect and worthy woman for Light. I'm afraid it will just be you and I.
Huh? What's up with that?
Come on, El, now you're just playing dirty.
El, you absolute rat. But alas, this episode was a quieter one, all things considered. So with my thoughts boiling down to this one being a fun time, let's slap on the next episode, where El's plan to use Iber and Misa comes to fruition, with some very unexpected results. With El's plan underway, the Yotsuba group begin to fall into place. A little too quickly, because before we get the scene of Misa's interview, Kira talks to Rem about his plan to marry Misa, and it's in this scene does the anime make it way more obvious and outright spoils the fact that the new Kira is in fact Higuchi. This is the one time where I will say that I avidly dislike the anime adaptation's take, because in the manga, having the audience find out that Higuchi was the new Kira alongside Misa made the interview scene so much more intense and memorable. Because after going through so many chapters of not knowing who the new Kira is, that was the perfect place to do it. And to have that be the opening of the chapter is such a great idea. And while yes, I completely understand that it would have been extremely hard to hide Higuchi being Kira, especially given the fact that he has a very distinct voice, to have the anime ruin this reveal by even drawing his iconic hair and outline was just, I don't know, that change felt not just unnecessary, but a bit weird too? It feels like such a weird neutering of such a great reveal. But alas, this was the route that the anime went down. And despite that error that I think really shouldn't have even happened, the anime picked itself back up pretty quickly, with L threatening violence on Misa, Mogi's voice actor John Murphy doing a great job at forcefully hamming up his performance, and Rem finds herself back in the story in such a cool way. I always really liked this plan of hers to warn Misa of who is Kira. Her help was solid as fuck, even if this time around she never developed an alliance towards Light like in the manga. And after we get the way worse Higuchi reveal, thanks show, the scene of Misa returning is adapted with some minor changes, like taking out the fact that Soichiro has decided to join back with L, because I guess that wasn't worth animating on screen, Light telling Misa that the rest of the plan is cancelled and not L, and Soichiro goes full Thought Patrol after hearing that Misa got 3 of the Yotsuba guys messaging her after she gave them her number.
Would you believe 3 out of 7 guys already messaged me asking for a private date?
What? Be gone, thought!
Base dad. But the scene of Misa doing her absolutely galaxy brain plan to get Higuchi to confess is kept pretty much entirely intact, with the anime even going out of its way to make Higuchi as dirty and as slimy as possible, by even having him mount her to get her to keep her promise of marrying him. A scene that, while it was never in the manga, was quite in character. Not to mention that Andrew Cavadas, Higuchi's voice actor, was perfect for the role. God, he's killing it. One thing I liked about the anime adaptation was that when Higuchi promises Misa that he will stop killing criminals, the anime cuts back to L's headquarters where Misa plays his confession to the boys from her phone, instead of having the whole scene where she walks into the building and announces it before showing the recording. A very smooth transition that I think really heightens the punch of Misa's move, and shows just how smart and well thought out her plan was. Look, I know the story ain't the biggest fan of her, but fuck me, this plan was always one of the best plays the story ever pulled. And with Higuchi being confirmed as the second Kira, the climax of the L Saga can finally commence, the anime holding nothing back as the episodes begin. Planning to catch Kira has begun, and with the show adapting everything in more or less the same fashion, adding in some very nice quick and sporadic visuals to illustrate L's theory of Light passing Kira's power onto someone else, visually representing just how schizo L sounds to everyone else in the room, and having L use food as a way to illustrate certain parts of his plan, it makes for 10 minutes of very engaging television. Seeing Wataru come to and fro with trays of food for L to eat was a cute detail as well. And after the ad break, seeing the 3 Yotsuba members talk and the whole plan going exactly as predicted was probably the closest we got to the anime adapting straight from the manga's pages, which given the less amount of dialogue in these chapters, I think was a lot easier to do. And Andrew is completely killing it as Hikuchi, perfectly capturing the panic of his world crashing down all around him and taking matters into his own hands. It's all fantastic stuff. And yeah, I don't really have much else to say, so let's see how it goes next episode. After a very funny scene of the show using an advertisement from the last episode and contrasting it with L's gremlin behavior in dissecting a banana, the adaptation is back on the rails, adapting the specific panel and Hikuchi getting the Shinigami eyes to absolute perfection, making Hikuchi look terrifying as a result. And yeah, I literally have nothing else to say. In terms of bringing everything together from the manga, the anime is basically 1-to-1, with the only real difference being the whole conversation between Aizawa and Ide being taken out entirely for just a cool reveal of them helping out and catching Higuchi. All in all, very solid. On to the next one. Hitting the ground running with the slight change of taking off Higuchi's mouth tape as he's being arrested, along with Rem being hidden away so that her reveal is more effective, which honestly I think was a neat attention to detail, the anime's adaptation of these next 4 chapters is stellar work. I love how once L sees Rem, the walls of text that were in the manga where he deduces that there must have been 2 notebooks and comparing the situations in Ayama, is boiled down to just a few seconds with L's thoughts all merging into one. The voice is all super intense and overlapping to show how quickly the gears inside his head are really turning. The victorious revelation of there being 2 notebooks being so much more effective. And right as L gets his eureka moment, a loud, plain sound is heard as he notices that the Death Note isn't in his hands any longer, and he turns over to Light, the Death Note in his hands, as all the sound stops, and Light lets out the most painful and strained scream I've ever heard from the show. The way the anime adapted this 2-page spread and made it look like absolute chaos as all of Light's memories came flooding back all at once, the show flashing random scenes, overlapping some on top of each other, and the voices being almost too much to bear, was some of the best use of sound and animation I've seen from the show so far. That first shot of Light screaming and his face being so contorted and even demonic was so fucking creepy. But the Light we all know is finally back, and the anime reverting back to his slitted eyes and evil smirk, highlighting the redness in his evil pupils, was such a great reintroduction to a character that right now feels almost invincible as everything went according to Keikaku. And one thing I appreciate the anime doing is that they made Light's explanation of his whole plan a lot simpler here, the show just focusing on the important details and taking out the fluff. It was also cool to see that the watch was adapted to be almost like a surprise, making you see Light as far more unpredictable, where even his garments are used as weapons. And with the gorgeous sound design of the watch ticking down to Higuchi's death, along with that bone-chilling heartbeat as Light pricks scarlet blood to write down Higuchi's name, the anime's adaptation of 2 banger chapters and managing to masterfully compress them into merely 10 minutes was extremely refined and tight work. The animation of Light's eyes brightening to red when Higuchi dies and looks towards L as he's distracted. God, it's all just so well done. And I can say pretty much the same for the other 10 or so minutes, though the amount cut was certainly a lot greater. Scenes like the boys discussing if Higuchi's death was a suicide, L realizing that the showing our Shinigami line from the Ayama case was meant literally, the Death Note being scientifically confirmed to be a Lovecraftian horror, L making fun of Light respecting Misa for all she's done for him, L almost getting to know about the ideal and losing one's memories before Rem shuts it down in a way Light doesn't approve of, and L interrogating Rem with that scene revealing that Light knew about the possibility of Misa forgetting L's name, are all gone from this version. Now that sounds and definitely is a lot of content to cut out, but while it certainly sounds like it would come back to shoot the anime in the foot, I found that the way the show managed to still keep the stakes high even without those scenes was a good reminder of just how much work was put into what scenes the anime would keep and which ones they would take out. The stakes are still fine, miraculously. While sure it was cool to see Light know that Misa might have forgotten L's name, as it shows that his plan has no loose ends, to see him just be so passive and faking his remorse after hearing that Misa split her life again just makes him so much creepier. This creepiness being more unsettling since we have no scene of Light respecting Misa like in the manga. You see what I mean? The anime's removal of certain scenes aren't just done out of rhyme or reason. Almost every change felt like it was done for a reason. Like the writers took a very long time making these decisions, and the fact that the anime only had maybe 1 or 2 blunders so far is insane to me. And reordering the fake rules around to have the burning rule first and not the 13-day rule was a great idea, as it made Light's victory over L feel much more impactful, as the manga sort of had one victory speech after the other, whereas here it's just a straight upward hill. The image of Light seeing himself as a god certainly hits so much harder now that the 2 rules were told back to back. There was also the way they managed to combine 2 scenes from the manga relating to Misa and Ryuk, where as she's given the Shinigami apple, Misa asks Ryu to make the eye deal with her as she's about to eat it, instead of making it afterwards like before. I found that this execution was not just a great comedic scene which very quickly transitions to a creepy one with Ryuk's intimidating looks and voice, but it was such a creative way to save time that the anime couldn't afford to lose. Also, Ryuk being immune to thoughts is funny. And all of these changes end on Light's evil face of twisted justice, Ryuk standing over him and Misa like a devil, and the last, and dare I say, best episode of the arc, concludes the finale of this glorious story. Episode 25 is truly special. It is the one where I would say that not only has the most changes in regards to how the story is told, but the new things they added, scenes and moments that have so much bite and material that one can talk about inside this final episode of the L Saga, played so much into why I believe Death Note had such a chokehold on anime fans for the longest time. In the opening 2 minutes, there is a collage of scenes of kids playing inside a school. Despite what is usually a cheery atmosphere, there is the sound and a quick visual of a crying child. Cries that get louder and more painful as the scenes get more disjointed and out of focus. The animation showing these shots of church glass and various other religious imagery. It builds up, and before the crying becomes too much to bear, the scene goes deathly silent, showing a church during a calm, snowy night, and then Watari, with a much younger L, can be seen standing outside the gate of the famed Whammy House, a church bell whose gong sounds cold and harsh, being the only sound that's heard before a film filter takes over and ends the scene from the POV of L, staring at a computer screen in complete silence, ending what I can only assume was a flashback dealing with his past. If this is L's backstory, from the first couple of minutes, there is already so much mystery that appeared. If that was L's backstory, then what does it imply? What happened? Why all the religious imagery? Could it be a Sunday Mass that L attended? Or was it a funeral? Is this scene depicting the death of L's parents? Is L the one that is crying? It certainly doesn't feel like an L thing to do. Was L a normal child who had lost his parents, and that's why we hear crying? Was their deaths the reason L became so alien? Could the pain of losing them be the reason this flashback feels so disjointed and unfocused, like trying to remember causes his mind physical anguish? Could their deaths be the reason he was so devoted to catching criminals in the first place? Or is the crying even L at all? Are these scenes with the other children taking place in a normal school, and the crying child was just being bullied? Or is it taking place inside the Whammy house, and this kid can't take the pressure of the demands the house has put on him and everybody else? To those who are confused at that question, trust me, in a few videos that will make complete sense. Hoo boy. All of these questions and more can be got from this scene. One that makes L into someone I look at with that same confusion I've always had, but for the first time, concern. What was that flashback? What did it mean? And it's only enhanced as after he goes into the big room of cameras and computers where Watori is inside, when Watori asks him what is wrong, in a voice that just oozes with grandfather-like concern. For the first proper time in the anime, L's completely silent. You don't hear any theories, any thoughts, any lines at all are nowhere to be heard. You don't even see his face as he just looks at Watori stiff as a board, which looks both pitiful and deeply unsettling. The mind that's usually so willing to be heard by everyone in the room is all of a sudden gone, without a trace, and this cold opening, one of little words and heavy emotion, kicks off the adaptation of the last 2 chapters of the L Saga. After L talks to Rem some more, trying to get more answers out of her, the inner monologue of L feeling like he's being watched is changed to just a few shots of L and Light staring at each other, the anime using the glass stairs to give this very creepy shot of Light looking as broken on the outside as he is on the inside, with some creepy music to boot. And after that, the anime veers from the manga again, with Light commanding Misa to do the killings while he watches L at HQ. Misa, all dressed up in a gothic style and having no light shining in her eyes, starts to sing a song all about her love for light and the underlying philosophy of a follower of Kira, singing the words, "Careful what you do, 'cause God is watching your every move. Hold my hand in the dark street, for of you do, I know that I'll be safe. Even if I'm far away and alone, I can be sure that you'll find me there. This, I know. You draw me close for a while, so quiet. You tell me everything. If I forget what you say, then you'd come to me and tell me again. Yes, you'd tell me once again. But what happens when I know it all? Then what should I do after that? What then?" Such creepy lines, just ugh, it's so weird. As the anime shows her killing more people in a very creepy slideshow, Shannon shows off her singing skills and gives a pretty decent version of the song. I say pretty decent because, not to blame Shannon for the singing, it's fine, but I find the way she emphasizes and speeds up certain words made the lyrics feel like they weren't paced with the song very well. It feels like on occasions Shannon is tripping up slightly to catch up with the instrumental, and it leads to the song being a bit awkward to listen to. It's clear as day that the song was written and paced with the intention of being sung in Japanese, which is no fault of the English dub. Even so, it gets the whole point across, the scene is still really creepy. As the anime goes back to the original manga's story and reorders around the scenes of the boys finding out about another Kira, Rem finding out what Light was planning all along, and L coming to the conclusion of having to test the notebook being done in a different way so that the story can feel more streamlined, the anime steps away from the source material again, and brings in 2 new scenes that I think solidified my love for this series the first time I watched it. The evening is dark, and rain lashes down all across Japan. Light makes it up to the top of the tower, where he sees L standing alone in the rain, bathing in its cold embrace. As L comedically gets him to come out into the rain with him, the two start talking to one another, with L complaining about the unusually loud bell that no one can hear besides him, claiming it's distracting, and it's been ringing all day, calling back to the first scene of the episode. Why exactly L finds it distracting, I can't say for certain, but from his dialogue, it sounds like the bell brings back painful memories of his youth. The fact that he alone can hear it is also a sign that he's either going mad, or that something is about to happen to him, something that only he and Light know about, even if Light cannot hear the bell. From Alessandra's performance, L sounds as distant as he's ever been. The voice isn't harsh and dry like before, but calm and even a bit vulnerable. From his expressions and tone, L sounds like he's given up. He sounds, for the first time, defeated, and he's strangely okay with that. But the spark he has for catching Kira, although dampened by quite a lot, is still present, as after Light talks some shit about L sounding nuts and that he would have a lot of trouble if he took everything L said seriously, he throws the same accusation back at Light, and asks a question so damning that even the world holds still to hear the answer.
Tell me, Light, from the moment you were born, has there ever been a point where you've actually told the truth?
God, the way the anime just goes dead quiet after that question was so good. Like the early deaths, it's like the air was just sucked out of the room, Light not being able to answer such a damning question. And after a few seconds, Light gives an answer that not only shows his true colors, but I think was his last and greatest fuck up when it comes to L.
Where's this coming from, Ryuzaki? I do admit I stretched the truth here and there. Find me one person in this world who's never had to tell a lie. It wouldn't be easy. Everybody lies from time to time. I've always made a conscious effort to be careful not to tell a lie that could hurt others. That's my answer.
The reason why I believe that Light trapped himself in this scene was that despite that long-winded answer, Light never really answered L's question, because he's so caught up on lying. In most instances, when trapped in a lie, one thing that liars do is over-explain themselves. When they're asked a basic yes or no question, they will act befuddled and confused on what you just asked. They will meander around the question and try to poke holes in it, and when guilty, they will try and downplay their actions by trying to say that what they did was normal. Every human lies, so what does it matter if I lie every now and again? Light fell into the same trap that L set for him way back in episode 10, where Light, trying to get L to believe he wasn't Kira, starts to over-explain and does the same things he does here. Why would someone who's not guilty of any crimes answer in such a strange way? Why is he trying so hard to act innocent? Why didn't he just say either yes or no? It's simple. It's because Light simply can't do it. His ego and superiority are just too much to contain. This is not even a moment where he has to be full on with his facade. The two are alone in the pounding rain. No one else will hear what he has to say besides the two of them. But that doesn't matter to Light. He still has to make L feel dumb for asking such a question. L is going to die any minute, so why not have fun with him for a little while longer? But above all else, the way Light answered the question gave it away too. Think back to when Light didn't have his memories. Any time that L asked him a question that was provocative or out of left field, Light would always respond with either anger or offense. His answers, while still more logical than the average person, were still human and believable. This change up in attitude was why L was so confused on if Light was Kira, but had the power passed on. But ever since he got his memories back, Light returned to his usual way of answering questions, meandering, blame-shifting, justifying, and just straight up making up things that L didn't ask. Through answering his questions like that, Light pretty much confirmed to L that he was right in his suspicions, and even though he could never prove with concrete evidence, he was still always right. His weak smile and slight glee of getting one last thing right before he dies was oddly sad to look at, almost as if that answer gave L some kind of peace before he died. Either that, or it's disappointment that Light didn't at least try something different. Maybe even disappointment that his friend was actually Kira. Either way, he may not have been the one to defeat Light, but he could rest easy knowing that he figured him out at least. With their last battle of the minds done with only the two of them as witnesses, the next scene plays, where Light and L are soaked to the skin, and L offers to give Light a foot massage, saying that it's the least he can do to atone for all he's done. After seeing L drip water onto his foot, Light wipes away at L's hair, and L says more ominous and mystical lines,
"It'll be lonely, won't it? You and I will be parting ways soon."
Before getting up and returning to the HQ, back to the manga's story that has his fate sealed. Now, many yaoi purists and other fans who read this story through a queer-coded lens have painted this scene as a romantic one, where the intimacy between Light and Elle during this moment is intimacy that can be deemed with more romantic intentions than any other. I mean, who can blame them? I mean, after all, the calm music, the more refined animation, the breathier voice acting from both Elle and Light, and the more blended soft colors certainly paint this scene with having these intentions. Almost like this last scene of the two alone is one that represents the tragic romance between two men who deep down have grown to love each other very much, but due to circumstance are doomed to be enemies, where one must triumph over the other. It's a way of looking at it for sure, and while I'll try to not sound extremely pretentious and even a little bit bigoted with this response, aside from the fact that I believe that queer coding a story like Death Note is a massive waste of time that feels like it rips out so much of the nuance Death Note's narrative contains, I also believe that trying to romanticize this moment doesn't grasp the true weight of this scene whatsoever, turning one of the most symbolic moments in the show into just a simple gay fantasy. The way that I view the story is not through a queer lens, but a biblical one. A theme the original story had, at least for a while, and the anime adapted, and for this scene, I believe doubled down on, because it shares a striking resemblance to an event that took place thousands of years ago. And for you all to understand the weight and impact of this scene through this lens, I need to share with you that context. Context that comes from the very book itself. And now that at least two of you rolled your eyes, one of you clicked off this video, and I have the possibility of some Christians getting angry about me having a certain edition of the sacred text, let us begin. In our world, there is a festival celebrated in Israeli culture called Passover, a festival which celebrates the story of Exodus, the time where the ancient Israelite slaves were freed from the powers of Egypt. Before one of these festivals, God had told Jesus that he was to be betrayed by one of his disciples, that one disciple being Judas. In the future, Judas would hand Jesus over to the Romans, where he would be arrested and crucified. And Jesus knew, until then, that his time on this planet was finite. So, before that dreaded day, Jesus would have one last meal with his disciples, and during that meal, this happened. Quoting directly from the book. John 13, 1-33. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus said, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean. And you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should also wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. I am not referring to all of you. I know those I have chosen. But this is to fulfill this passage of Scripture. He who shared my bread has turned against me. I am telling you now before it happens, so that when it does happen, you will believe me that I am who I am. Very truly I tell you, whoever accepts anyone I send accepts me, and whoever accepts me accepts the one who sent me." After he had said this, Jesus was troubled in spirit, and testified, "Very truly I tell you, one of you is going to betray me." His disciples stared at one another, at a loss to know which of them he meant. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter motioned to this disciple and said, "Ask him which one he means." Leaning back against Jesus, he asked him, "Lord, who is it?" Jesus answered, "It is the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish." Then, dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot. As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered into him. So Jesus told him, "What you are about to do, do quickly." But no one at the meal understood why Jesus said this to him. Since Judas had charge of the money, some thought Jesus was telling him to buy what was needed for the festival, or to give something to the poor. As soon as Judas had taken the bread, he went out, and it was night. When he was gone, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will glorify the Son in himself, and he will glory him at once. My children, I will be with you, only a little longer." So with this context, and looking at this scene through that lens, suddenly the biblical symbolism hits you with the strength of a bulldozer. Light, a man who El thought, or at least we believed, was a dear friend to him, would end up betraying and killing El in the end. El knowing that the time he has is limited, and he has no way to escape his fate, and instead embraces it, trusting his fellow man to defeat Light eventually. But El, in these dark times, and knowing exactly who was going to be the one to end his life, like the Lord, does something so pure and selfless, something that in the past was a job reserved only for slaves, that it moves Light to do something similar to him. Light has no idea why he's doing it, but later he gets a good idea, similar to the passages. Even that line of El telling Light that he and him would be parting ways soon shares a sad resemblance to the line, "My children, I will be with you only a little longer," from the Bible, painting this scene not with a romantic brush, but a friendly one that I would dare say is far more tragic and hard-hitting. To stare into the face of your enemy and to do something that selfless and that vulnerable speaks volumes of your character. And El, doing this, proved to Light subconsciously that he will always be better than him. Without this video becoming too Bible-thumpy, because that's not what I'm here to do, I find that Death Note's strongest and more poignant scenes are the ones that indulge in the supernatural, the abstract, and the biblical. And this beautiful addition from episode 25 is the exact scene I'm talking about. From devoting themselves to the religious side of the story's setting, this scene has so much symbolism, so many ways you can view these two's dynamic, that it's just a work of timeless art. And come on, from this one shot alone, you can't tell me that they didn't at least use this painting as a reference. But that joke aside, I love this scene. This, and combined with the rain scene from before, made for an edition that added so much complexity to Light and L's dynamic than the manga ever did. If you put this scene in front of me and then asked me what I thought was going through Light's head, I genuinely could not tell you. The way he looks at L as he washes his feet, is that a look of regret? Pity? Fake empathy? Is he feeling anything at all? I don't know. And that's the best part. Either way, it makes the scene that plays afterward so much harder to watch. Fun little fact about the biblical scene, it was one of Alessandro's favorite scenes to record. He even believes that L knew he was going to die when talking about it during an interview.
Maybe we all, on some level, know when we're gonna go. Certainly, I think he did.
But after that beautiful scene and the manga goes back to the cold story where L states he's going to test the notebook to see if any of the rules are fake, we get to the moment of his death. And my god, what an adaptation. Not only does the anime make Rem look horrifying as she walks into the shadows after killing off Watari, but the whole building being bathed in this harsh, hellish red light only enhances the tension. Like the building itself is set on fire. The intro flashes through the mind as L remains as calm as he can on what he told Watari to do should anything happen to him, and as the scene becomes more panicked as he asks for Rem's location, a single heartbeat and a jolt of pain is heard. And the moment finally happens. L dies in slow motion, the anime adding this strange texture as his body falls to the ground. When Light dives in and catches him, Matsuda's cry of L's fake name is muffled as the church bells come back. The scene of Rem dying and the moments from the opening playing and occasionally cutting back to Light's face that slowly begins to contort until at long last, the evil grin of triumph is all that L can see. Light's face completely absorbed in red light, looking like the demon he finally let out after all this time, even for just a second. In this version, we never get confirmation of L knowing that Light is Kira, as no voice is heard. Whether he gets his confirmation or not is a complete mystery in the anime, as his eyes slowly close, the bells and music vanishing to silence as his lifeless body runs cold. The anime immediately picks back up with the chaos of the group thinking they're all gonna die, and Light goes off to find Rem right away instead of waiting for L to be confirmed dead. After he finds Rem's death note and the boys agree to stay on the case, with Matsuda saying that Light sounds a lot like L, Light walks away in the same animation as the opening of the tower scene, and he moves down the same hallway, this time flashed by a strike of lightning, as he's draped in a hideous blue shadow, a shadow that only makes his red eyes more prominent and terrifying, ending the episode on a very unsettling and brutal note, as Light Yagami has finally won over L, and the reign of Kira can truly begin uninterrupted, making this final episode of this saga one that I would consider to be one of the greatest finales in all of fiction. So, that was the L Saga. My fucking goodness. With 25 episodes to adapt 58 chapters, the anime's interpretations, additions, and trimming to various scenes, besides one or two hiccups, leaves this saga as one of the best adaptations of a manga that I've ever come across. Not only does it pay respect to the source material, but even the more artsy scenes are done as a way to enhance core themes of the original story, elevating the narrative and not diminishing it. It takes a certain kind of passion, restraint, and respect to be able to do so much of your own thing without it coming off as disrespectful to the story you're adapting, and Death Note's L Saga is probably one of the best examples of this. Every time the animation gets more colorful and exaggerated, while it can sometimes come off as quite funny, is never a detriment to the story. If anything, it makes some of the more iconic scenes from the manga into something even better, the potato chip scene being a very good example. Another thing that I never mentioned but found quite endearing was that the anime went out of its way to add Ryuk into more scenes, giving him a greater presence than he did in the manga, where he only pops up when it's convenient. I find this new ever-looming, all-seeing presence to be quite the treat, and it made for a good combination of funny and intense scenes. And above all else, I found this anime's pacing to be some of the best I've ever seen. Never has a show done so many cliffhangers so effectively and knew exactly how long or how short a scene had to be to get the core message of that scene across. And to be able to create 25 episodes of binge-worthy television back to back is a feat that deserves nothing but admiration and respect. The L Saga is basically the closest I've ever seen to complete perfection. From being a solid adaptation of the original manga and having enough of its own stuff to have its own unique identity, the anime for the L Saga is an enhancement over the original, and is one of the few times I can think of where the anime is better than the manga it adapted. It is truly a piece of modern anime art, and even despite seeing it for the 4th or 5th time at this point, the story is still as wonderful as ever. If you haven't seen it, go watch it, because holy shit, you are missing out. So you'd think that with the anime doing such a spectacular job on adapting the L Saga, that would mean that the Near Saga would be just as good, right? Well, you'd be wrong. What made the L Saga so good to begin with was that not only did it have very talented writers working on the series, but it also had just the right amount of episodes to tell its story. Considering that the OG saga was 58 chapters and an average episode adapted 2 to 3 chapters, the 25 episodes was just about enough to keep the story contained without causing any big problems. The number of episodes greatly helped the story out. Now imagine for a moment that you have to adapt a story with about as many chapters, but instead of 25 episodes that you can use to adapt and pace out the story, you only get 12. Do you see the glaring problem with this? With that massive restraint put on them in adapting a saga that had probably more going on than the L Saga before it, talking about the Near arc is going to be, let's just say, very hard. I beg all of you to bear with me as I try my absolute best to piece together this absolute mess of an adaptation, which is contained inside episodes 26 to 37. May God have mercy on my soul. Hey everyone, just gonna shout out a few projects here and we'll get right back to the video. My webcomic Shadows has 2 new chapters up since the original manga video and contains some of the best artwork I've done thus far. If you want to see this lifelong passion project of mine and know that I can do original stories, then a link to the webtoon will be in the description box below. I highly recommend that you check it out. Honest Bonds, The Human Plague, which is the 3rd book in a series I've worked on with Sergeant Major Mario, was also released after the manga video. And like Shadows, it contains some of the best writing that both of us have ever done. So if you would like to see me dive into the world of literature along with Sergeant Major Mario, the link to the books will be in the description as well. Big recommend, especially the 3rd one. That it's quite tight. It's quite good. And lastly, I kind of have a sponsor. A sponsor that didn't pay. So, you know what I'm about to say is something that's completely out of my own free will. I was reached out by a site called ToonTube to do a review of one of their up-and-coming comics called Candala, created by an artist named Fritzy. And while I don't have enough material to make a full-fledged review unfortunately, I still want to shout them out, since I found this story to have some of the most refined and detailed artwork I've seen from comics in a good few years. And from its unique setting and heavy leanings into Indonesian culture, Candala has an identity that I've never seen before, and I'm really excited to see more. If the pages you see right now on the screen interest you in the slightest, a link to the comic will be towards the ToonTube website where you can get access to the first chapter for free. And if you like what you see, you can drop a few bucks to get access to the other chapters as well. And personally, I think it's worth it. There's also now a Kickstarter to try and get physical copies of the work released, so if you want to help out an artist who's had this story for many years, I've actually seen him release his work on Tapas and he rebooted it for ToonTube, so this guy clearly has a lot of passion, then go and show him some love. I wish the man nothing but the best, and I hope he reaches his goal in the end, because I feel like stories like Kandala is something that a lot of people really want to see. But, with all that out of the way, it's back to the video. Fortunately, the saga is off to a good start, as before it dives into the adventurous adventures of Near, the show just does a long recap of the events so far, but this time through the perspective of L, where most of his greatest inner monologues are recapped, and redone without Light being there. Getting to see everything unfold from his end makes it even more impressive on how, despite not knowing anything about the Death Note and the existence of Shinigami, L was able to catch up and be on equal footing to Light pretty much all the way up until the end. It was also a great way for the anime to just repeat some animation and get away with it scot-free by having it be a highlight reel of some of the best moments in Death Note. Pinnacle of working smarter, not harder. It was all in all a very good shift in perspective for about 10 minutes. And his final message, one that has one last great performance from Alessandro, fades away with the rest of the Kira investigation, with the sound of a long technical beep piercing into the ad break, a sound that eerily resembles that of a heartbeat flatline in a hospital to indicate someone's death, Light's scarily stone-cold expression being all that's seen. After this, the moment of Light being promoted to L and Watori is played with some changes here and there, like Soichiro already being in the room, which means that the scene of him informing the boys on the police's reaction to Kira still being around was taken out. And Light saying he'll act as Watori is said pretty much right after he says he'll be L, something that happened a little later in the manga. As the scene ends, the anime adds a small addition where Light, being sad that L is gone and is disappointed that everything is now too easy, sees a vision of L looking at him with hair over his eyes, saying something that's not heard, but we can only imagine it was something relating to Light being Kira. A scene that ends with a sort of nostalgic vibe to it. This small scene works as a nice transition to Light and Misa on their first proper date, the two of them being in a different setting than the manga's one, where Light, still sad over the loss of his greatest rival, is not paying Misa any kind of mind, which, to be honest, is pretty much in character for him now, and only absentmindedly tells her that they should live together. Upon hearing this, Misa cheers in victory and briefly mentions the names of all the girls Light was seeing because good god Light was such a whore. This is also a scene that I know would be used as evidence for Light being ooh gay for L, but since I am not in any kind of mood to tell you why that's not the case, because this one is so obviously a case of a rival being sad that a thrilling fight is over if you just keep your fucking hormones in check, let's just move on. And with the changing of that scene being one that feels more natural, we get another taste of the anime's stellar original work, with a brand new scene of Light standing on top of L Tower, having a chat with Ryuk that was originally during the scene of Light and Misa walking together in the manga, which to be honest is way more effective here as the two being alone makes it feel a lot more personal. After all, this whole adventure started because these two boys met up. Today, Light has won. He is now officially the god of the new world, and on top of L Tower he looks down upon it, and is ready to judge the world and punish its evil, and with nobody getting in his way, the anime dives into the deep end of its artistic symbolism by having Light warm up his hand like a conductor about to guide a mighty orchestra, and with the Death Note being placed on a musical stand and his pen acting like a baton, Light gets to work on the creation of his new world, and the slaying of possibly hundreds, even thousands of criminals. The scene showing clear as day the thrill and almost euphoric godhood that Light feels in slaughtering so many people. The music being this angelically demonic choir that only heightens the sense of chaos and disorder that Light is spreading across the world, free from the shackles of L's all-knowing eyes. Characters we've seen before die in ways more horrific and brutal than their manga counterparts, with Iber's death being especially foul. And with the anime adding in that small bit of lore into the world's reaction to Kira's new reign of terror, we get a scene of a timer counting down to 0, and we get the scene of the Whammy House getting the news of Watori's death, and the introduction of Near and Mello from chapter 60, all in one go. the anime taking out the small scene of Mr. Rogers taking Mello and Near into his office. The episode ends on the line of L being dead, a pacing change that I think was a very welcome one given the sporadic nature of the manga's beginning, as it ends the episode on a very ominous note. Just a quick disclaimer before I go on. To those who might think I'm shitting on the manga too much and I'm trying to undermine it a lot in this video, just know that I still really enjoy it. What I said in the last video wasn't a lie. I still consider it to be peak fiction. I just personally believe that the anime's interpretations and changes were so solid that it made an already great story even better. Death Note's great when it decides to be artistic. And do not fret, manga purists, as I get further and further into this arc, my tone towards the sacred text is going to very rapidly change. You can trust me on that. Anyways, with that little clearance made, let's move on to the next episode. As we get the scene of Mello crashing out with Rogers and showing that he's sick of Nears' bullshit, a scene that actually happened way later in chapter 62 as a mean to provide Mello with some backstory before kidnapping Sayu, the anime takes this massive step forward and then goes all the way back to chapter 60 where Near talks to the president about his findings relating to Kira, with the anime doing a small change and making the vice president from the manga, George Cyrus, already the president in this adaptation. And if you thought that was a massive jump for the anime to make and are confused on this very strange deviation relating to the president from the OG source material, then strap in, because that kind of leaping forwards and backwards is only going to get a lot more frequent, and the changes are going to get so much worse. However, in regards to Mello crashing out, it's not the worst change in the world. If anything, I find getting this out as soon as possible makes the pacing of the actual Sayu kidnapping a lot stronger, since we now understand Mello's whole deal and the drama doesn't have any pauses in it. So that's alright. But after the anime jumps back and shows that the SBK is formed and the scene of an FBI agent confirming the location of the Death Note is taken out, we get the scene of the Yagami family hanging out in the house, with Matsuda fancying Sayu and everything. Vincent Tong is finally allowed to just be funny in a low-stakes scenario, and my god, he is killing it. It's great to hear his performance just be free from all the edgy shackles. With Misa's global acting career being taken out, because I guess the anime didn't find that detail important, Soichiro gets the call from Aizawa, and the MPA director's kidnapping is known to the rest of the group, the kidnappers demanding a trade for the Death Note. The anime taking out the small moment of Aizawa thinking that Matsuda led to the Death Note's existence to keep the tensions high. Afterwards, the anime jumps ahead a bit with the scene of Soichiro accusing an FBI agent of kidnapping the director after they demand that the Death Note be given to the land of the free, and then the show jumps back to Mello's scene of him interrogating the MPA director, the anime doing a very nice job with his slow and dramatic reveal. I always did like Mello's fashion sense in the beginning of the Near arc, it's really good shit. And one thing I will give credit to the writers of the anime is that they actually did a pretty good job at combining dialogue from various different moments in the manga to try and make Mello's accomplishments and drive to kidnap Sayu much more streamlined. One of the very few times that I will say that about the adaptation of this saga. After the anime cuts out the scene of Soichiro and the FBI agent coming to an agreement thanks to Near, the boys are in hot pursuit of the kidnappers, and Mello gives a very cold and maniac performance in revealing that Sayu was kidnapped. The anime unfortunately taking out a good chunk of that scene, which involves Soichiro trying his very best to remain calm. It jumps straight ahead into chapter 62 where Light says that it was Kira who killed the director, and the anime takes out another massive chunk of that scene where Light explains his viewpoint to the boys about how they could catch Kira with his revelation, and he prevents them from moving in to protect Sayu. A scene that I believe did great at showing Light's inner compassion for his family, so it's a shame this was taken out. After that, the anime jumps forward a bit to Near talking with his boys in the SBK about Kira, and Near sniffing a very strong scent of a familiar boy, and the task force get their 4 AM call from Mello, his threats being cut drastically short, which meant that Soichiro didn't have a chance to be the badass father he was in the manga. This cutting is also done when Soichiro comes to the decision to make the trade with Mello, and the anime takes out the whole part of the team discussing on what they should do to make sure everything goes well. Get used to me saying they cut this out quite often, because when I say that a lot of these moments arcs get cut to what are essentially the highlights of the respective manga scenes, I'm not even joking. It's actually insane on just how much context, tension, and characterization is just erased so that the anime can have any kind of pace. The deep tension that was in the manga is now mostly just a series of cheap thrills. It's honestly a shame. But not all is too bad, as with the next scene of Near and his boys talking things over, it was really funny to see that the anime did adapt to Near just being straight up shit at darts, proving that when it comes to landing any hits on his own, he just can't step up to the task.
Boom. Roasted.
But he manages to successfully get a jab at Light's nostalgia, as after having an admittedly cool entrance that the anime did pretty good at adapting, the episode ends on a shot of Light in an abyss with a scarlet chain flowing around him, with the end attaching to an image of L, visually representing the feeling Light had had all those years ago, when his greatest rival was still alive and thriving. One of the creative choices I found to be quite nice. With the anime recapping a bunch of the highlights, we're straight back into Near grilling Light and then giving him a chance. The anime cutting out his shit dart skills to gaslight you into thinking that Near knows what he's doing. And after Soichiro tells Light that he should do whatever it takes to get Sayu back even if it costs Soichiro his life, Light stands up and berates his dad for even thinking of such a mindset. And I'm sorry, maybe it's just the way Brad delivered the lines, but there's just no way in hell you can convince me that Light didn't mean at least a portion of the things he said here.
Stop talking like that, Dad. You might have made your peace with the idea of dying, but have you ever thought about how painful it would be for everyone else you leave behind? I'd never be able to forgive you if you ended up dying in front of Sayu. Then I want you to do whatever's necessary to make sure both you and Sayu get out of this alive. Promise me, Dad.
From the way the cold act drops and just how emotional Brad sounds, I don't know. That performance, if it was one, was just way too real. It can't have been an act. And having the Kira theme be played here, one that was usually used for more sinister scenes, gives the song an almost melancholy, even tragic twang to it, a part that wasn't present up until this moment. The anime then does its first change up in a while by having a whole scene of Light talking to Misa about going to LA, instead of it being just one panel flashback in the manga, where Light's coldness and distant attitude because of the dire situation is on full display, completely vanishing to the bathroom while Misa excitedly picks out some clothes for their trip. Inside, Light stares at his reflection over some running water, voicing the possibility that he might have to kill Sayu if things go badly. A choice that, judging from his face and the way Brad delivered that line, is one that he seriously doesn't want to make, and will only do it if it really calls for it. This scene I think was a really good one that helped to humanize Light a little bit more, and getting to see Misa's reaction to that declaration and seeing her expression of shock, which again pushes the theory that Light really cares about his family, because if he didn't, Misa would not be so shocked with him saying that, was also a really good touch. All in all, great scene. I actually really liked this one. After the anime puts all the dialogue of the LA plan into Light's mouth so that the story can keep going okay, this scene being before Soichiro's promise to Light from before, the scene of Soichiro getting on a different plane is mostly the same, except that instead of Ide following them, the show just gave it all to Aizawa, for whatever reason. And the way the next series of events is pieced together differently from the manga, good god. The hijacking of the plane from chapter 64 is done before Soichiro talks to Mello. The whole scene of Aizawa texting Light on what's going on is taken out. Then it jumps forward to Light asking for Near's help, then jumps back to Soichiro being contacted by Mello, his taunting and threats being cut down to just a few lines, with the whole scene of the plane changing course causing the passengers to panic being cut out as well. Mello hearing Soichiro's phone ringing and demanding he hear the conversations is also gone. Near's taunting towards Light is gone too. The whole Sayu exchange, one that really dove into Soichiro's morality being broken at every turn, is reduced to just a few scenes. Light's outburst at Misa is played way later than it was before and spliced in between the exchange, which I honestly don't mind since it did better at showing all the stress he's under, and Brad is killing it with his performance. And the stress is even greater with the anime adding in 2 scenes of him debating on killing Sayu with a piece of the death note he has in his watch, and choosing not to go through with it due to how her death could be tracked back to him. Even though I personally believe that Light would never kill Sayu and the reason he didn't kill her was not just because it could be traced back to him, seeing him almost go through with it in the anime was a very unsettling moment. Then the helicopter and the missile are launched with the show recontextualizing the scene to make it so that Light doesn't know where the death note is or which one to follow, and the events finally play straight to the manga. for like 3 panels, and then the show cuts out a scene of Aizawa updating Light on the situation, reduces Soichiro's whole resignation from the police into just a few seconds scene of not seeing his eyes. In the anime, him quitting the police force is just not a thing that's mentioned or even happens. The episode also puts in a new scene of Light being completely defeated from this exchange, and Misa's act of kindness towards him is treated with much more obvious venom than before, as Light has no energy left to hide his coldness towards her. A small but effective scene at showing where his priorities lie. It also just shows how helpless and brainwashed Misa is in these moments, like Jesus Christ, poor girl. And then the show does its biggest leap and change yet, in that the next scene is of a bunch of Nears' task force dying around him. A moment that was in chapter 66 after Mello got the Death Note, and through this threat, Near got a clue on Mello being behind everything, all of which are scenes that are not in the anime. Then the scene involving Near and Light exchanging their information, a scene that had so much meat in the manga, has a good portion of its fat removed, with the reveal of the Whammy House being a big deal, which was discovered by Aizawa, being saved for later. The only scene we have left is the one where Sido talks to Harmonia Justin about getting his Death Note back. A scene that was in chapter 65, which takes place before the moment of Near talking to Soichiro and getting the idea that Mello was behind the kidnapping, ending the episode there. Are you seeing just how hard it is for me to make this all sound coherent? So, yeah, the anime's usually solid adapting skills of the manga is... yeah, it's extremely neutered here, it's basically gone. What is about to happen is a series of events that will be so drastically different from the source material that I beg all of you to go easy on me. Please, I am trying my best. Before you think I'm lying, yes, this episode does actually adapt the 9 fucking chapters, and boy, it suffers as a result. Episode 29 opens on the Yagami family living in the countryside house, with Sayu being mute from the trauma she received from her kidnapping. A scene that manga fans would know was in chapter 71 of the manga. For just some context on how much of a leap that was, the furthest chapter episode 28 went to was chapter 66. Then the anime jumps back to change up the scene in chapter 65 where Sido finds Ryuk. And rather than Ryuk going away as chill as he can, given that Light and Misa were in the same room during this moment in the manga, this time he is all alone in the apartment and was grabbing an apple from the fruit bowl before he was interrupted. This then transitions to the scene from chapter 66 of the Shinigami boys talking, and I gotta say, the voice acting here is just, god, it's absolute peak.
I want my notebook.
I have no idea where it is.
Why am I not surprised?
Look, I told you, stop following me.
Then give me back my notebook.
If you want it back, you're gonna have to look for it yourself.
Moron.
Sam Vincent is the voice of Sido in the dub, and the nasally, almost Valley Girl accent he gave him just makes his character so much fun to listen to. He's not around for long, hell he fucking leaves in the same episode, but god, for the short time he's here, Sido is just such a funny addition. The whole scene involving him with Mello's boys was a great moment that not only allowed us to hear more of his iconic voice and changed up the original line of him putting the Death Note on Cal into something a little funnier,
Tag, you're it.
but seeing Sido be scary for all but 5 minutes because Mello is just that unhinged, and getting to hear that unhinged behavior through the voice actor's really good delivery was great to see be exaggerated from the manga. Mello's deduction skills made him into such an engaging character, and that use of the fisheye lens when he orders Sido to work with him was genius. You can't tell me that you wouldn't follow his orders, like god, those eyes are fit to kill. But with that small bit of praise aside, the anime cuts this interaction down very short, meaning that Sido finding out that Rem died isn't a thing here. So that's nice. As for the next scene, the reveal of the Whammy House, something I talked about in the last episode, is instead done here. And after this, the anime jumps forward to chapter 68 and 69,
nice,
with Light getting the name of the new Death Note owner, Cal Snyder, manipulating him into giving him the location of Mello's hideout, and burning the evidence. Sido watches Light and Misa cuddle, and as he sees the address from the burning bit of paper, goes off to get his Death Note back. Different to the manga, where he was in the Shinigami realm pondering the Great Orb. Now this scene I just mentioned doesn't sound like much to those who have only seen the anime, but to manga fans, you probably would have noticed that between this scene and this scene, so much of the original story was taken out entirely. For one, the whole Cal Snyder plan was one that had way more weight in the manga due to not only being spread over more time, but it was how Light managed to find the location of Mellow's first hideout. Yes, I said first hideout, because fun fact to anime fans, there was not one, but 2 raids in Death Note's story. The first raid was an important plot point due to the fact that it number 1 showed that Mello was a massive threat that wasn't to be taken lightly, 2 made Sido something unknown to the task force and made Light have to rely on Ryu to deal with him in a second raid, and 3 it showed the chokehold Kira had on the world because he got men who worked under the fucking President of the United States to carry it out. And then afterwards, Light just straight up kills the president. Allegedly, it's not actually clear if he did it or not, but knowing Light at this point, I wouldn't put it past him. But because the president was changed to be this guy in the anime, and that whole plot point is just completely scrapped, the story attempts to fix this by making it so that Light got Cal to send them the address of the hideout, and then that plan is just shifted to being the start of the second raid. And while it's not the worst change in the world, like, it still kind of makes sense. Even still, the fact that such a big part of the Near Saga was taken out entirely is just baffling to me. With this plan gone, Sido is essentially reduced to pretty much nothing, with Ryuk apprehending him during the raid, a move that makes no sense given how chaotically neutral he is, but it made sense in the manga because Light ordered him to do it as he was made aware of Sido's existence and Ryuk owed him one. To think that in the anime the boys only figured out that Sido was a thing at this moment and not earlier is just... it's so strange. But with all that aside, the anime does do a really good job at adapting the second raid panels from the manga. Scenes like Soichiro volunteering to do the ideal, him getting the Shinigami eyes, and the animation of the raid that really captures the chaos of the whole movement were all scenes that were quite faithful, albeit, you know, rushed to high hell. It still had its moments of greatness, however, like that wave of screams as most of Mello's men die from heart attacks inside was just... that was harrowing to listen to. Sounds like the gates of hell were just opened. Even though Soichiro's badassery with Mello is not shown anywhere near as much before he gets riddled with bullets and Mello commits a case of violent clouds, the voice acting of the two psych each other out and like getting more and more angry as Soichiro does what any good cop would do did wonders at making the scene still have a bit of stakes, despite being incredibly neutered. And when the smoke is clear and we see what damage has been done, we get the adaptation of Soichiro's death, which I gotta say was also a scene that I believe was handled really well, and to an extent, was even a bit better than the manga. Why I believe that's the case is for these following reasons. With the scene of Light logically thinking about what he should do and what Mello being free signifies from the manga being gone, it makes him trying to get his dad to write down Mello's name a lot more impactful, because it doesn't feel as calculating as it did before. Now it actually feels like Light is desperate to both 1, get a win over Mello, and 2, to make his dad's death mean something. And like before, Brad's voice acting here really sells the theory that Light was actually devastated that his dad died, because even between the lines of him being calculating, you can still hear a sense of urgency that wasn't there before. A sense of urgency that is riddled with emotion, and a complete denial that his dad is going to die.
Come on, please, Dad. You can't die on me like this. That's important, but I've got bigger things to deal with right now. I've got to get him to write Mello's name in the notebook. I can't just come out and say it's not too late. No, wait, maybe I can. No one will think it's weird if I get upset and panic. Dad, write his name. You can't let him beat you like this. Write his name down with your last bit of strength. Do you want to die in vain? Dad, no! And
is crying at the end. Look, I'm sorry. Those tears are real.
Wake up! Come on, damn it! Don't you die on me, you idiot! Dad!
That is a son devastated that his dad is gone. Brad's voice acting is just, it's on another level in this show. Good God, it's so good. Chris Brighton is also giving a once-in-a-lifetime performance as Soichiro, and the anime does a devastating change as in this adaptation, when he realizes that he can see Light's lifespan, something that he wouldn't be able to do if Light was Kira, he sheds some tears for the first and only time, even getting a little choked up as he does so.
I still have the Shinigami eye. I can see the numbers above your head. You really aren't Kira. I'm so glad. My son.
Seeing that Soichiro cried tears of relief at that just makes the whole lie that much more cruel. My man shed tears over this. My god, this is so sad. And the way that the anime did the actual death was fantastic as well. Seeing the light actually fade from Soichiro's eyes, the pen dropping in slow motion, that long silence being pierced with the monitor flatline, and the transition to the moonlit sky, which could indicate that the grieving could have been anything from a few minutes to a few hours, everything about this death was heartbreaking to watch. And getting to actually see Light's face in the end and see just how stone cold it is after the death of his father was a very nice change from the manga. That is the face of a man who has lost everything, and at this point, has nothing to lose. For the first time in a while, I can confidently say that this was one of the few changes the Near Saga made that I actually liked quite a lot. Soichiro may have had so many of his moments cut out, and that's a massive shame, but his death, despite that, was still very impactful, and it was all due to the anime's execution, subtle changes, and Chris providing a stellar performance all the way to the end. A great scene from a mid-episode that adapted way too much in the span of 20 minutes. At least it went out with a high note, I guess. With Near coming to the conclusion of Light being Kira getting straight to the point and not meandering like in the manga, the anime adds in a small scene that I actually found very interesting. The public's perception of Kira. In the manga, there is a few times where characters will talk about how the world views Kira, most of the dialogue being about how his reign, although brutal, has caused at least some positive change, like the ending of wars and crime being reduced drastically, but that was really as far as it went. Here though, the anime actually dips its toes a little bit into how the world responded to Kira, with concepts like kids being taught to respect Kira by their parents, the same way kids are taught to respect God and Jesus Christ, people refusing to give out their names for a report because they don't want to die, and kids threatening bullies with putting their names on the internet to get them to stop bullying them. And the brutal fact that for some people, Kira's reign took away people that their partners loved dearly, damning the living to a life of loneliness and despair. It's a very good new scene that I believe does wonders at adding in some world building to the world of Death Note, world building that, given the story, only added to the tension of Light being eventually caught. While yes, a lot of the old bad things would come back if Kira was to go away, the new bad stuff that's happening because he's around, I would argue is somehow a bit worse, but that's just my personal opinion. I also appreciate that this scene didn't paint Kira's actions as good or bad, but was just illustrating the very real outcomes of such a society. Sure, justice may be served for a lot of people who are living good, honest lives, to quote Light, but to others, Kira's reign is one filled with paranoia, grasps for power, and torment. Concepts that the anime managed to masterfully show in just under a minute. And as we get back to the story, it remains Kira-focused, as episode 30 starts off with Demigawa's ranting and ravings, a scene from chapter 77, where he's constantly preaching the word of Kira despite being a slimy piece of shit. And then the President Conference where he says that America will not fight Kira is played afterwards, a scene that was in chapter 75. They also adapted Matsuda snatching the apple out of Ryuk's hand from chapter 76 and put it in this scene, and I'll admit I think the anime's gag is better. After the moral debate about catching Kira is done with relative accuracy, and Near's scene of roasting the president is done after that debate and not before, the anime adapts the scene of Mello breaking into Howlinder's house and using her to get to Near. Yeah, remember when in the manga the reason Mello got to Near was because he knew that Hal was connected to Near because he and Hal actually knew each other beforehand because Hal was actually a double agent who gave him insider information. Yeah, that whole part was just taken out entirely, yay. Man, I love it when the show just leaves out moments that add so much to the characters. My fucking god, Mello, what is happening to you? But in terms of the confrontation between Mello and Near themselves, it was handled really well. The anime even adding some good old church imagery to spice up the scene, which I think was quite neat. And I gotta say that the performances from Kathy Weseluk as Near and David Hurwitz as Mello are just fucking stellar. The voices match their looks perfectly. And speaking of the new voice actors, here are some fun facts about them. Starting with Kathy. Kathy started voice acting back in 1988, and her role as Shampoo from Ranma 1.5 was her first break into anime voice acting. She was also an associate producer for a show called Disc Drive on CBC, and through that and some radio training, she grew to understand and appreciate the technical sides of anime production, similar to Alessandro. While she found Near fun to play, she does say that it was sometimes hard to keep the voice reserved. And because Near appeared halfway through the show, Kathy never got to see what happened beforehand, which just makes her performance and Carl's direction that much better and really impressive.
Second part's great, first part just a tiny bit tighter now.
Oh, whatever, Carl.
Just do it, Wesley. Like that's not a stage name.
It's right.
Moving on to David, he got the role of Mello because Vincent Tong, who you'd remember as Matsuda's actor, told him to give it a try and after auditioning, landed the role, saying that the transition between theatre acting and voice acting was quite smooth given the similarities of both fields. Speaking of theatre, he was actually originally a theatre actor, and Mello was the first time he ever actually did a voice acting gig. Along with relating a lot to Mello, he also enjoyed the more unhinged and aggressive side to his character, as in real life, David is a very shy person. He also said that performing was sometimes a hassle because due to his Canadian accent, he would sometimes pronounce certain words in his accent, like the words sorry and about. Since the show was airing on YTV at the time, David actually watched the series alongside his dad, which I think is just so cute, and it's just also like, David just seems like a really nice guy. I recommend that you try and find his interview because my god, the man is just so sweet. These two voice actors are just amazing additions to the show, like I am not going to criticize them whatsoever. But as the anime jumps forward to chapter 78 where Near theorizes on which of the rules is fake and gets Light's input, stunlocking him with making Ryuk lie about all the rules being real and willing to prove it himself, the anime then cuts out another massive chunk of the story by not having Mogi get called by Mello and go into Near's headquarters, which is where Near drops that banger question that makes Aizawa start to have doubts on Light's innocence. This storyline being cut out also means that Mello never got to pay Near back, and the 13-day rule being bullshit is never actually confirmed. And on top of this, Mogi not being in Near's headquarters means that the lie Near told to the task force of Mogi dying to get one of them to contact him if they had their suspicions also doesn't happen. Show, what the fuck? But with Aizawa's suspicions of Light being Kira growing bigger and bigger and Ide understands his predicament like the absolute bro he is, a scene that was originally from chapter 81, the two of them are overheard by Light, something that wasn't from the original and honestly makes Light look a lot more threatening, because now he knows that people are onto him. And the anime then leaps back to chapter 79 where we get the riot of the SBK building, led by the oh-so slimy Demigawa, Light doing a very poor job at hiding his excitement of Near's possible death. By the way, there were some scenes of Demigawa going across the airport and to America to do the whole riot thing. Yeah, the plan isn't as well explained in the anime as it was in the manga, which is, you know, a shame, but at this point is to be expected. All in all, great episode for diving into the concept of Kira, Mello and Near slayed, and everything else is just kinda eh. After the anime adds in a small scene of Mello seeing what's happening at the SBK building, a scene that I think is quite neat, the anime then goes into the scene of Near telling the task force to contact him if they think Light is suspicious. The whole riot scene is also just beautifully animated and the stakes were actually quite high, and like the manga, it did great at showing just how flawed Kira's philosophy is. I love it, it was great. And after Light tells them that they can go to him alone instead of Near being on the phone to listen in, the anime does something that I will give it credit for by putting a lot of emphasis on Aizawa and his decision to go and talk to Near. He even gets a small scene of talking to his daughter, which shows that his bond with his family is at least a little better than it previously was, which I think is very cute. Good to see Aizawa getting some characterization in the Near arc. But as Light gets started on hiring Mikami as the new Kira from chapter 81, the anime jumps to chapter 82 of Aizawa talking to Near. However, in the anime, Aizawa doesn't go to Near's HQ, but instead just tells him everything over the phone. This was a slightly strange change, but given that Mogi was never captured, I guess it makes sense to just change up Aizawa and Near's chat anyway. There's not really any stakes in this version, so why go the whole 9 yards? After Aizawa notifies Light that he spoke to Near and Light silently copes and seethes, the anime changing up the pacing so that Mogi and Aizawa check Misa's house after Aizawa tells Light he's suspicious and not before, the anime finally kills off Demigawa as he flies too close to the sun, in a scene that I think did a very good job of making Mikami look way more threatening. Instead of killing him off first like in the manga, Mikami kills all the people Demigawa hired as new executive members one by one, leaving Demigawa to look on in horror at what's gonna happen to him, making the scene a bit unsettling. I also appreciate that the anime doubled down on the exaggerated Death Note writing animations, as Mikami not only swings his arm like he's wielding a sword, but he also moves around the room like he's in a physical fight. It was so pointless and we did not need to have the pen have sword swishing sounds, but my god, the fact that they even added it in is just... it's a joy. It's so fun to watch. This scene was also the time we finally get to actually see Mikami, and after he kills all the members, Light explains to the audience how and why he chose Mikami to begin with, whereas in the manga, this was a gradual build-up to Light choosing him to become the next Kira. And while I would usually say that I do not like the changes that they made, to be honest, I can't really decide on which one is better here. Because while I do appreciate the manga building him up, since it shows that Light is always on the move in regards to finding scapegoats in different angles to get a win, that introduction in the anime was just so fucking powerful. Like, that shit, it did go hard. It did go really hard. Even if it does come at the cost of Ryuk being around far less than he was in the manga. Seriously, where the fuck is he half the time? After what feels like an eternity of the anime jumping back and forth between chapters, the first half of episode 32 is just a fancier adaptation of the same plot from chapter 84, Mikami's backstory, where the anime did a clever thing of making us see the backstory between moments of him going through his daily routine, in an almost American Psycho kind of way, where everything he does feels so precise and calculating to a point where it feels creepy. And rather than his backstory being told by a narrator, Mikami's voice actor, Kirby Morrow, does the monologue. And it makes just everything Mikami says that much more unsettling, because in this one, it sounds so personal. Every scene that was from the backstory has more weight to it, thanks to it feeling like Mikami is like reminiscing on how far he's come. And he speaks of his disdain for evil with such clarity, and his tone is so factual that you cannot believe he doesn't believe every single word that comes out of his mouth. And with his performance being more and more dramatic as Kira enters the world, subtly showing the worship he has for him taking over his mind, was such a lovely little detail as well. By the end of the backstory, he sounds like a rabid fan who's out for blood. The Death Note giving him almost a sense of euphoria at being chosen. Speaking of chosen, here's some fun facts about the voice actor. Kirby has worked on loads of different animes before Death Note, with some of his works being Gundam, Inuyasha, Ranma Half, and Stargate Atlantis. He found the role of Mikami to be very fun, as he finds playing evil characters to be much more satisfying, as he feels like he can let loose a lot more. And Brad has said in an interview that he and Kirby worked on lots of different projects playing all kinds of dynamics, and he felt like it was a treat to hear that Kirby was going to play Mikami, as he finally plays a character that worships Brad's character. Banter like that between lasting friends is just something I think is very sweet. Rest in peace, Kirby Morrow. You were taken too soon. But after that very smooth and creative adaptation of a single chapter, the show is once again jumping forwards and backwards as Mikami, seeing that Light can't do anything, picks Kiyomi Takeda as the new spokesperson for Kira, after the anime cuts out the whole scene of Mikami sneakily telling Light that he will take the initiative from chapter 85, and Mikami's reasoning for picking Takeda from chapter 86 is put here instead of later. Aizawa being told by Mogi that Takeda was Light's ex is taking out for Aizawa already knowing this information, and after Light confesses his whole phase to the group, they agree to get in contact with her to get information on Kira. The anime splicing out Takeda and Light's conversations from chapters 86 and 87 into a more natural conversation, if I'm being honest. Even though at this point in the manga, Light and the boys were in America and flew back to Japan, but I guess the anime just placed them back in Japan after Soichiro's death, because them coming back to Japan is just... it's never brought up, if I remember correctly. It's just kind of doesn't happen. They just went, poof, back in Japan. Then the anime jumps all the way back to chapter 85 to where Mello calls Misa a dumb hoe, with Matt being in the same room. Yeah, Matt's here by the way, and don't worry, Mello's whole investigation on Misa is totally going to not get cut out. What do you mean it's not going to be there, The story then jumps forward to chapter 87 and 88 by combining the scenes of Light and Takeda in the hotel and Mikami finally getting to speak to Light, taking place in just one night as opposed to two. Light says the magical words, and like Mikami, Takeda is now under his spell. God, just so much story is taking out, and it's making my brain hurt.
Maybe I'm thinking about this too much.
Now that Near's incompetence when it comes to travel is open for all the world to see, with a small cute scene of Commander Rester acting like a tired parent on the plane, the anime dives into chapter 89 with Near telling Light that he's now in Japan, the possibility of them meeting face to face now being more likely than ever. After the anime does a cool interpretation of the two making their declarations, with them being on a building mere meters apart, the anime does a fancy montage of clips as Light gets excited at the possibility of winning and killing Near once and for all. Near then talks to Rester and does a recap with Legos to get the audience caught up to speed on what's happening, but the anime takes out his goal of catching Kira with solid proof, because I guess this wasn't important to the show right now and they wanted to reveal that in the finale. Oh, spoilers by the way. You might have noticed that I haven't really mentioned Near all that much, even though manga fans know for a fact that loads of his scenes were taken out, but I did that intentionally so that I wouldn't repeat myself saying this one point. Near feels almost non-existent in the plot for a good while, and it's quite annoying. What made him interesting in the manga was that with every move Light took, Near was always there catching up to him, theorizing and piecing together Light's actions as the story progressed. And while I get that maybe this was done so that the anime can feel like it's not repeating itself too often, since Near's scenes are mainly just him recapping things we already saw, not being able to hear his thoughts in moments of genius just makes him feel far more flat as a result. Despite being the new successor to L, he's barely even around here, which is kind of frustrating. But with Near finally making an appearance again, Light and Takeda's talk from chapter 90 plays out fairly dead on to the manga, with Takeda getting in on the killings after making Light's plan for Mikami to make a fake notebook a lot sooner than in the manga, which was a strange choice given that this was a twist that was done only around the finale. Why the anime decided to reveal this sooner I will never know, but okay. But after Kiyomi goes off on a new program, and Near finds out that Mikami is what he calls ex-Kira in a montage that I think does pretty well at highlighting Near's almost superhuman level thinking powers in an artsy way, his inner voice even slightly resembling a bit of L's Eureka moment from episode 24, the anime gets to the moment of Misa's beef with Takeda, a scene that was before this moment. And after Near makes everyone feel more uneasy by asking Aizawa if Light and Takeda's meetings are being visually recorded, Misa and Takeda have their catfight in the hotel, with the anime heavily emphasizing Takeda's devotion to Light, with them replaying the scene of him saying that she will be the goddess of the new world. Which, yeah, I think was a pretty good addition, because in the manga she's just kind of silent. Getting to see her laugh actually makes her a lot more creepy. And after implementing a scene from chapter 93 where Hao tells Near about their spout and Near calls Light a used bicycle, Mikami murders the guy on the train, getting the SBK to follow him and ending off the episode on a more scary note. After Near brings up the idea that the Shinigami will rat them out if they get too close to Mikami, the manga jumps forward to chapter 94 where Aizawa does his own genius play, and then jumps back to chapter 93 where Light's misogyny goes up 200% over Misa and Takeda's stunt, with Brad delivering that line with so much venom it's hysterical.
Misa, you idiot. Why pull a stunt like that? No, Takeda, you're just as bad. Why are women like this?
This scene is delivered with surprising accuracy, with the anime making the comedic moments a little bit funnier, and then Giovanni tells the boys that Mikami's acting like a schizo, the lip reading still being a very weird plot point that just comes off as a bit lazy if I'm being honest. Then Aizawa's suspicions turn out to be correct, and it's at this point in the anime where he finally meets Near in person, something that in the manga he did ages ago back in chapter 82, but I explained why I believe they did this back then, so I won't repeat myself here. With Takeda bragging about her accomplishments, the anime adds in a scene of Mogi and Misa being taken by Linder and Rester. Then the battle begins with the anime drastically cutting down the reasons Near actually kidnapped Mogi and Misa, but hey, you're expecting that at this point. Chapter 96 reaches the spotlight and Giovanni touches the fake Death Note, with the show doing a good job of showing Giovanni's panic at possibly seeing a Shinigami. And as the episode reaches its end, it stays true to the manga's order of events, cutting out large chunks as it does so. I do apologize that I'm not really going in depth with my thoughts when it comes to these episodes, but I'm sorry, at some points there's just so little to talk about that having to recap is pretty much all I can do. The ones that they're adapting are okay, but again, I'll promise that I will, try to at least keep my thoughts inside. I do not want this to just be a recap of a retrospective, okay? I actually want to put my opinion into this. Anyways, let's go on to episode 35. Cutting out lights in Near's declaration of war for the upteenth time, episode 35 adapts the melancholy opening pages of the 97th chapter very well, adding in some small stuff of their own to make it more entertaining and even a bit bittersweet, with Mello finally getting some screen time after not being in the story for so long. It was bad enough in the manga, but in the anime, my fucking goodness, Mello's presence was just neutered. And after what feels like forever, the anime is finally just sticking to the manga's pages, and is a solid adaptation of chapter 98. And despite some reordering of scenes from chapter 99, it's still keeping to the spirit of the manga, even making Matt's death as sudden as his voice. The animations during the chase scenes and the gunning down of Matt, and Mello running away from the place with Takeda, all the animation in here is really, really good. Very solid stuff. And seeing just how threatening Mello is towards Takeda, while also keeping that little bit of humanity to him, was also adapted extremely well. David is really selling his final performance, and the way Takeda is fearing for her life throughout this entire hostage situation is incredibly solid. Getting to hear Takeda's voice actress Heather Dorkson act her heart out in a moment of horror of killing off Mello, and hearing Light being cold and calculating to her predicament with no real care on if she lives or dies as long as she keeps on killing people, was such an unsettling scene. With her hopeless crying, she absolutely killed it. And I liked how the anime put in some small details of Takeda just not really caring about what happens as long as she gets out alive, like her accidentally wiping off a bit of her lipstick, and not even reacting to it. And seeing the light in her eyes vanish when Mikami killed her, and seeing her body get engulfed in flames after Light recites what he wrote on his piece of the Death Note, thinking that he was the one that killed her, it's just good soup. It's good fucking soup. I can't really say much except that this episode was actually a really solid one, and I do appreciate it for just sticking to the book. So to make it not seem a bit too short, here's some fun little facts about Takeda's voice actress. Death Note was the first project that Heather worked on with Ocean, saying that the role, quote, fell onto her lap, and she really enjoyed working on it. Like many of the actors before her, she was originally a theater actress, but then moved on to film to broaden her range, and it was actually her agent that directed her towards doing some voice acting. So if it wasn't for that agent, we might have never gotten to hear her voice come out of Takeda, so talk about a happy little accident. As the anime comes to a close, besides one moment where Aizawa tells us the rules about the Death Note we already know for pretty much no reason at all, the show takes the task of being true to the manga as seriously as possible, as the final showdown between Light and Near commences in glorious fashion. The build-up towards them even seeing each other was so damn solid. Love the score, love the animation, love the slow motion walking that looks like they're about to walk into hell. It's good shit. It's really, really good shit. As everyone waits with bated breath and Near's smile at Light was animated perfectly, Mikami finally shows up and writes down everybody's name. Mikami writing down the names was peak exaggerated animation. This moment, one that was already very over the top in the manga, is done with even more craziness as the animation becomes filled with dramatic angles, camera shakes, quick cuts to real life and then cuts to the Shinigami Eye perspective, and the sound design being very punchy and overwhelming to show off just how fast the whole scene was actually playing out. The anime adding in Mikami's sheer ecstasy when writing down the names, screaming victory as the wave of euphoria finally consumes him and leaves him looking like a pretzel, was such a darkly funny thing to add to this already great scene. Not to mention the way that the anime adapted Light's inner monologue of his victory was also a very good scene, with the animation becoming more exaggerated and Brad barely being able to contain Light's joy as he revels in what he believes is the victory of a lifetime. I liked how the anime froze time itself and changed up the colors drastically to make this visually appealing, as Light gloats and brags about how smart he is and how he's convinced he got the win over Near, making this 1 to 2 minute long scene just so fun to watch. Light is just oozing with so much confidence, it's just so slimy. And as the anime goes back to normal and Mikami is told to come inside the warehouse, Light barely contains his laugh. Everybody panics, and when the clock reaches 40, Light's fuck up is animated in glorious fashion, and the episode fucking ends.
Hey yo, what the fuck?
For the first time since the L Saga, Death Note managed to have a banger cliffhanger. And with this fantastic episode being capped off like that, it made me want to immediately slap on the next and final episode. As the finale kicks off with the cliffhanger to show that no one in fact died, the anime flawlessly adapts the sheer panic and confusion inside Light's mind, and Brad does an amazing job at making his voice go from cold and prideful to childish and even pathetic, shooting accusations left and right with no rhyme or reason. The anime even manages to add in a layer of tragedy as Aizawa talks to Light like a parent who doesn't want the suffering to go on for any longer than it needs to, with Matsuda sounding utterly betrayed as his voice has no sadness or rage, but just defeat. The fire and confidence that was once in Light's voice is completely gone, as he is now reduced to a helpless child who is now desperate to escape his fate, with little thought put into how weak and sad it makes him look.
It's a trap! This whole thing is a setup! This is all part of Near's plan to frame me! This proves it's a trap! Stop it! No! Impossible!
The show also changes Near's expose on Light to being something way shorter and much more merciful because holy hell does the manga go on for fucking pages about the tiny little nuances of the investigation. Yeah, this will be the one time I will ever thank the anime for abridging the original story because 70% of what Near said in the original was really not needed. And Kathy's voice acting here was just beyond excellent. She speaks with so much conviction and the anime does fantastic at just showing off all the details that were necessary to have Light be exposed as being Kira. I just wish that Mello did more. You know, that would have been nice. But as the anime takes out Light breaking like a guilty Ace Attorney character, it instead transitions right into Light, at long last, breaking. His joy going from being barely contained to being let loose entirely as he starts laughing like a maniac. Brad's performance being absolutely god tier as he bellows out the most chilling and heartless laugh I've ever heard. The sheer insane joy of Light at long last being able to express himself as the Kira he always was is heard so clearly through this laugh. The animation doing a stellar job at making him look demonic as Kira is finally set free. Between the high-pitched wails, there is this feeling of euphoria one could hear spewing from Light's mouth, like a dam finally breaking under the pressure. And as he stops his howls of ecstasy that felt like it sucked all of the air out of the room, Light finally confesses to being Kira all along, his eyes glowing with murderous intent. Right after the ad break that has a very ominous line about humans eventually dying, we get the speech of Light boasting and bragging about all the good he had done for the world. Brad absolutely killing it with every line as the animation revels in the insanity of Light's broken mind and destroyed sense of justice, with fantastic camera angles, exaggerated poses, beautiful foreshortening, and fast movements. This whole speech is done so well because Brad was able to make Light sound so convicted and honest with his words that you 100% believe that Light thinks what he did was righteous and justified, making you want to absorb every word he says, even through his voice going in and out of that once clear and calculating tone to show off how being exposed has just broken his mind. But as Near tells Light to sit the fuck down after hearing his vocal huffing of his own farts, Light, after returning to his Kira superiority and tries to pull a fast one of the boys through another great line delivery and through very fast animation to show just how close Light was to almost succeeding in killing Near, Matsuda, who was silent for ages, snaps and shoots Light just like how he did in the manga. And the way the gunshot and the surge of pain looks like it just made Light snap out of reality with the animation contorting his face into something almost inhuman was such a splendid touch. Not only does the voice acting continue its perfect streak as Brad nails Light's pathetic state as his voice is now reduced to inconsistent cries and lashing outs with no care for how they may sound or come across.
Matsuda, you idiot! Who the hell do you think you're shooting at? My dad. That's right, Matsuda. In this world, all those earnest people like him who fight for justice, they always lose. I know you understand, so kill the others! Shoot them!
Matsuda finally gets to sound righteous and angry, and the way his voice sounds so hurt and betrayed makes this scene a contender for being one of the best in the whole show. Vincent Tung, who was a master at playing the comedic relief, finally gets a moment to be totally serious, and the complete tonal flip he does with Matsuda in this scene is nothing short of flawless. Through every syllable you can hear the rage and betrayal oozing out of his voice, as Matsuda demands Light to tell him what Soichiro dying was all for, enraged by Light calling him a fool. And when Light tries to finish Near's name with his blood, Matsuda shoots him a few more times, screaming as he does so, and marches over to finish the job.
I'll kill him! I'll kill him! He has to die!
The way the anime shot this scene, no pun intended, made it so fucking intense. The camera shakes so violently as Matsuda declares that he's going to kill Light, almost like the camera itself can barely contain his rage. And Vincent's delivery of "he has to die" filled with so much raw emotion, that fast zoom in into Matsuda's angry eye, the barrel of the gun flicking as the hammer goes down, and the loud gunshot that feels like the whole world stopped for a split second, was peak animation, reminding me of that one scene way back in episode 17 of Soichiro pretending to shoot his own son. But as we all know, Matsuda missed. He was stopped by everybody else, which I also gotta say, Aizawa, he only says like 2 words here, and those 2 words are just Matsuda, and like, the shock in his voice when Matsuda is just freaking the fuck out, it's scary. Like, Matsuda's not to be fucked with. But Light is now pretty much dead. He's reduced to a bullet-riddled state, and after Light's pathetic cries for help towards Mikami, Misa, and Takeda are heard in another painfully good performance from Brad, the anime decides to make one last change. And here is where we get to what I think is one of the most debated parts in all of Death Note: how the anime changed the ending. For those who do not remember the manga or haven't read it, the ending was basically and this ending, suffice to say, does not happen in the anime's adaptation. For one, Ryuk is only present during the final confrontation when Near acknowledges him and tells him stuff about the Death Note, and then after that, he just vanishes for the rest of the scene. Once Light finally breaks and gets shot by Matsuda, the anime deviates from the manga in that instead of him getting killed by Ryuk and dying of a heart attack inside the warehouse, the ending goes like this. Mikami, rather than surviving, kills himself in order to let Light escape, severing an artery that kills him in seconds. Light leaves the warehouse to the panic of the police force, but after Light's critical injuries, Near says that Light isn't going to get far. With the police department still going out to look for him, the anime ends with Light seeing a past version of himself walk by, showing how far he's come, or fallen, from his humble origins, while Ryuk is watching from afar, reminiscing on the time he spent with Light, giving a brutal and cold monologue as he does so.
Well, Light, it looks like you've lost. That is part of the agreement between a Shinigami who brings a notebook to the human world and the first human who picks it up. Who knows when you die? And I don't want to lie around waiting. You'll die here. It was good while it lasted. We eased each other's boredom for quite a while. Well, Light, it's been interesting.
Ryuk finally writes down Light's name, a promise that he made so many episodes ago, leaving Light to die on an abandoned staircase. Light passes away seeing a vision of L watching him, with the anime showing Misa in dark clothing going on about her life, leaving the anime with a much more somber ending than its manga origins. Now when it comes to these two endings, determining which one is better is a very hard question to answer, because I believe that it completely boils down to personal taste, as both endings do a wonderful job in achieving roughly the same result. In both endings, Light is backed into a corner and with nowhere left to run, goes insane and does whatever he can to win with no regards for logic or reason. He is reduced to a cornered animal that is desperately trying not to die, and both endings achieve that sense of desperation perfectly. With the manga, this desperation Light goes through is one that is more through the sense of catharsis. It completely revels in how Light is reduced to a pathetic and groveling child in his final moments, with nobody coming to rescue him. After giving heart attacks to thousands upon thousands of people, that canon number still fucking terrifies me. He's at long last getting a taste of his own medicine, showing that he's not special in death, as he is also very scared of dying, and wondering what's on the other side. The manga very clearly feels good to have Light finally get punished after all he's done, but in saying that, the story still acknowledges the impact that he left upon the world, as the last chapter illustrates a world that is messy and riddled with crime. The manga's ending showed that while Light himself died, Kira still lives on in the hearts of millions, which ends the story on a mysterious uneasiness that shows that the world is in a state that will possibly never be undone. However, in the anime, Light's fate is much more drawn out, and even though he managed to escape due to Mikami's sacrifice, Light is still in no condition to keep on living. He's dying of his wounds, he's running for his life, but above all, he's been caught as being Kira. Whether it's through blood loss or rotting in a prison cell, Light is doomed, whether he's caught or not. Light has lost. His dream of being the god of the new world has been shattered. He has nowhere else to go. To have Ryuk kill him from afar rather than right in front of him is something that I believe still has weight to it, because to Light in the anime, there is this sense of complete isolation during his last few moments. Light wasn't left dying with people surrounding him like in the manga, but all alone, with no one to call to, or even to look at. The fact that nobody is watching him as he dies is scarily sad. Light probably didn't even know that Ryuk was going to kill him until he had his heart attack. His sudden shocked expression could be taken as him having a jolt of pain as his heart stops, or in my opinion, is an expression of horror, showing that in his final moments, he was betrayed by the Shinigami he had wrapped around his finger, or so he thought, this whole time. A Shinigami that's simply going through with a promise he made long ago. A promise that he never took seriously. In his dying breaths, Light knew exactly who killed him, dying on a dirty staircase in an abandoned building, with no one by his side to ease him into the afterlife, besides his own imagination. The staircase that he dies on can also be a cool symbolism to show that Light made it neither to heaven or hell, but is in the in-between, referencing exactly what Ryuk had told him so many years ago. The anime's devotion to more religious imagery was obvious from the L Saga, so it makes sense that at the very end it would try again. And it definitely makes this feel a lot more impactful. A visual symbolism of purgatory? Hell yeah. Good shit. And having Light see a vision of L before he passes was a great way to show how much impact L left on Light, even after all these years of him being dead, where even in his final moments, Light could not escape him. Even though he was not the one to pull the trigger, L had won in the end. Whether it's a spirit or just a delusion thought up by Light, showing L made this an excellent moment, with Light's face showing an expression that's not one of anger or sadness, but peace, as he finally succumbs to his heart failure, dying and never achieving his dream of being the god of the new world. Ryuk's speech at the end, which was said to Light's face in the manga, I believe holds far more weight in the anime, because the fact that Ryuk is saying it all from afar truly shows how much he saw the whole thing as just entertainment. His sheer disconnect towards Light's agony and suffering by not even watching him go is way more effective at showing how afar he was mentally throughout the whole conflict. Ryuk acts like a person watching a show and finally turning off the TV when it's all over, nonchalantly writing down Light's name like he's just another person of a race he's been killing for hundreds, even thousands of years. The heart attack here feels like a final kick to the teeth rather than a massive gut punch like in the manga, the almost merciful whimper feeling arguably even more insulting than a grand and dramatic death. For Ryuk, it was good while it lasted. His boredom was relieved for quite some time. His monologue sounds almost like a man giving a half-assed eulogy to a person he didn't really care about, going over the rules one final time, and not really showing much praise for anything else. After all he's seen and watched Light do to avoid himself getting caught, Ryuk simply calls him interesting. Not good, not great, interesting. His speech is of a god having made peace with the fact that one of his toys is broken and he can't fix it, casually tossing it aside for the next one to come by. All of this kind of analysis was stuff I was able to get solely because Ryuk spoke it from afar in the anime. And because of that, I think it's very effective at what it tried to do. When it comes to Mikami, I'm in the camp that he was done better in the anime. To have him kill himself to let Light escape does show in a way how far he's fallen as well, with the anime showing that even someone like Mikami can succumb to insanity and desperation to have a perfect world, and when that dream cannot be realized, he would rather die so that his god can have a chance to live on and escape, ending his own life before he can see the world he hoped to achieve rot away in front of him. It's either that or he just broke mentally and decided to kill himself anyway, regardless of what might happen to anyone around him if he did so. There's a few ways to look at this action for sure, and all of them are just as creepy and unsettling as the last. Now don't get me wrong, there was some nice catharsis in having him turn his back on Light in the manga, looking at him with disgust when he needed him, but I feel it was a bit more impactful to have it that Light, even at his worst and his most pathetic, still had people who would die for him because his ideals were just that good. Plus, Mikami followed Light like a devoted follower, so to have him off himself in hopes to save his god makes all the sense in the world. If you know anything about cults, which was what Kira was, come on, let's be honest, then you would know that if you find vulnerable enough people, they will do anything in order to achieve the goal you promised them. And Mikami was a prime example of how desperate these kinds of people can get when things go tits up. Even though we never get to see the aftermath of Light's death like we did in the manga, in a way I believe that works to the anime's advantage, because rather than getting answers like in the manga, the future of the world after Light's death is now completely left up to interpretation. Did the world go back to normal, or did it continue being the minimally dropped crime world that Light had created? Did the police ever tell the world Kira was caught and killed? Do they still use his name to make sure that crime doesn't happen anymore? Did people take things into their own hands when they saw that Kira was not really killing people anymore? Were there more cults that grew from Kira, or were there more riots? All of these and more questions are not given an answer in the anime, which in my opinion helps the show in being an ending that still has plenty of impact to this day, and makes for a very popular topic of conversation among anime fans. Having the story end with Light dying does make sense because the story was, at the end of the day, the tale of Light's time with the Death Note. So once he's gone, it doesn't need to continue on. In a way, this ending can also be symbolic to how self-absorbed Light was throughout his years of terror. So once the main character is gone, the world being left with many unanswered mysteries and questions makes perfect sense, which makes for a lot of interesting topics of debate amongst fans about what happened to the world after Light died. The mystery of the world's future, while it can be seen as a slight cop-out, was still a very solid way to end the story. One thing I also think is the case when it comes to choosing which ending is better, is that the ending you will go for, in my opinion, will entirely depend on how you viewed Light as a character. If you were a fan who saw this story as a madman who was going on the power trip of a lifetime, then seeing Light squirm and beg for mercy in the manga is the better ending, because it's the story of a tyrant getting what he deserves. However, if you viewed the story more as a tragedy, where you saw Light as a good soul that got more and more twisted and warped by the Death Note, then seeing him run away to no destination and watching him die alone and in pain after seeing how far he's fallen would hit you a lot more. And because I personally viewed the story having more tragedy instead of tyranny, I would say that the anime's ending was the one that stuck with me the most. I loved how melancholy and sad it was, and it made me see the monster that Light had become. A monster that never would have manifested if he wasn't the one who picked up the Death Note. An ending that I think is just that little bit better. Now that doesn't mean that the manga's ending isn't powerful in its own right, not at all, but from a purely subjective stance, I just found the anime to be more thematically and emotionally satisfying. It just goes to show that you know a story is great when you see it end two different ways and the only source of debate is people not being able to decide on which one ended better. Very few stories in existence have that kind of bragging right. Death Note is just, it's built different. Speaking of differences, here are a few fun facts from this final episode. Brad actually wanted Light's voice to sound more disgusting during his moment of running away. And to do this, Brad committed a massive no-no in voice acting by drinking chocolate milk and a 5 Alive as he was recording, which caused his voice to sound so horrific that the producers, after watching that scene, made him record everything again due to how disgusting it sounded.
And I'd take a swig of that and a swig of milk, and then I started doing the breathing and the panting and the gasping and stuff as he's walking around, and it sounded so awful. But I wanted that horrible, horrible sound coming out of my mouth.
I didn't know you were so method.
Yeah, and we re-recorded the whole thing because the producers watched it and they're like, it's way too disgusting. And I'm like, that's what I was going for!
Mikami screams of pain as he kills himself, the screams that made it into the show, was actually done as a take for funsies, done by Kirby's request.
Do you want to do one more just for kicks?
Alright, if you wanna?
Yeah, let's do one
You
more.
got it in you? Okay.
Yeah.
That was maybe even better.
Something to say.
You know what? That was pretty fantastic. You know what? I think that's our keeper.
Yeah.
It just went to a few more places.
And Brad has gone on to say that Death Note was the most fun show he's ever worked on, and even confesses to being extremely nervous about adapting the final episode because he respected the Japanese performance so much. And with those final fun facts, that was the ending to the anime, and the end of my analysis of the Near Saga. And with that bit of praise done and out of the way, what the fuck was this arc? Not only was this saga handicapped by having all of its material only be allowed 12 episodes to try and adapt it, but the way that so many important storylines and moments get taken out in order to give the story at least some kind of pacing makes it feel extremely rushed. If the manga's biggest issue was that it felt like it was sometimes too self-indulgent and inner monologues were something that everyone had all the time, then the anime's problem was that it wasn't indulgent enough and had too little monologues. And because of this, the moments felt more like a highlight reel as opposed to an actual story. Like I said before, because the L Saga had 25 episodes to pace out the story, the show was able to adapt about 3 chapters an episode, sometimes even 4, with relative ease. But in the Near Saga, with its 12 episode runtime and having 50 chapters of plot to adapt, the anime would sometimes adapt 5 or 7 chapters in one episode, with the record number being 9 whole chapters for episode 29. Think about just how much stuff needs to be cut from 9 chapters for it to be fit into a 20-minute time slot. That is insane. And the way that the anime jumps between moments from different chapters so much made me feel like I was getting whiplash trying to piece everything together. Sure, yeah, they did it in the L Saga, but it was way more merciful there. Like, if I was to comedically explain what it was like watching each of Death Note's sagas, think of it as like playing 2 games of Super Mario 64. The L Saga feels like it was playing through the game roughly as intended, where while it may sometimes get a star in different orders and reveal some cool secrets, it gets the stars in the right order in the right worlds and gets to the end 100% with pretty much no issues. The Near Saga, however, feels like it played Mario 64, but instead of going through the stars in order of the worlds, it decided to get 1 star here, 1 star there, 1 star all the way over there, and at the end, not even beat the game fully and just gave up. One arc stayed mostly on track with its adaptation, while the other just skipped and jumped around like it didn't have a care in the world, missing out massive chunks of the story and forgetting why those plot points were even there to begin with. Even if I wasn't constantly cross-referencing, the arc still felt off. Speaking of being off, let's talk about Mello for a second, because anime, what is your goddamn problem with them? It felt like after Mello gave Near the tip on some of the rules being fake, it feels like the writers just went, alright, that's enough, and just straight up took Mello out of the story until the end where he dies an unceremonious death. His use of Soichiro to make Near figure out that it was him behind the kidnapping? Gone. His threatening of the president? Gone. The raid of his first hideout? Gone. His connection to Hal Linder? Gone. His evidence of the 13-day rule being fake using Mogi? Gone. His whole investigation into Misa to find out if she's a second Kira, which had Matt be more of a character and made his original death, although quick, just a bit more impactful, also gone. So many of Mello's greatest moments that shaped the narrative of the manga very drastically, are just tossed to the wayside so that the story can be more about Near and Light's feud, ignoring the fact that because of Mello, Near actually stood a fighting chance because Mello had the balls to get his hands dirty. The sheer level of disrespect that Mello received in the anime adaptation was baffling and even a bit sad. Hashtag justice for Mello. The anime seemed to follow Oba's mindset of fading Mello out of the stories, that he couldn't have too much of an impact. Yeah, I'm still pissed off by that, by the way. But it feels like they took that mindset too far, to a point where Mello's addition to the story feels neutered in comparison to the original. And if you think that this neutering of his character was bad, don't fret. The other adaptations are gonna get so much worse. And I can't even mention Matt's assassination because the show literally had so little of my man doing shit that I got absolutely nothing. Sorry, nothing is there. Why was he even there to begin with? And although Near was around more than Mello, like I mentioned earlier, he's barely around as well. His constant keeping up with Light's antics are reduced to just a handful of scenes where, because they took so much out of these moments, started to feel like Near was doing all these kinds of ass pulls and somehow succeeding. Something I never got from the manga. There's very little representation of Near learning the information as he goes along in the anime, and because of that, Near feels like less of a character, which is a real shame because he was pretty good in the manga, all things considered. I don't think he is as great as L, but he's still fine by himself. It's just... my god. This arc, like... so much was taken out that it's just left as just... this. Ugh. God, what happened? With all this said, however, even though I feel like the anime butchered the manga's story, I can't say with a clear conscience that the entire arc was bad, because it wasn't. Scenes relating to Light's manipulation of Takeda, Soichiro building up to his eventual death, and the ending were all very good scenes that managed to capture the darkness and tragedy of Light's descent into Kira remarkably well. I cannot just straight up lie to you and say that these scenes are bad. They are not. Like, everything about them is close to perfection. And that's the big thing about this arc for me. When it gets stuff right, it does it excellently, and makes some of these moments even better than the original manga. But it's when it gets stuff wrong that it's so obvious and kills the stakes that the original story had, resulting in an adaptation, although being one where I'm sure they tried their best with their limitations, is just a complete mess. There's also something else that I feel like is very important to mention when discussing this arc, and it's something that Sergeant Major Mario, a good friend of mine, brought up to me when we finished the Near Saga in preparation for this video. The way that he sees the Near Saga is similar to how a movie would adapt a book. Because books are so long and there's so much detail that couldn't possibly make it into the film, writers and directors trying to adapt the story will of course make changes to try and refine and tweak the story to make the film adaptation work. And the Near Saga, to him, had a similar thing happen. He makes the argument that just because things were taken out or were different doesn't inherently make it bad, and that people should be careful when it comes to critiquing the saga, because you still have to keep in mind that adapting everything into 12 episodes would have objectively been impossible, and that because we read the manga, that played a big role in our dislike of the changes made to the story. Which is a very interesting point to make. And with that in mind, could my thoughts being so negative towards the Near Saga now be because I read the manga, and I know what they did and didn't take out? The answer, to put it bluntly, is yes. He's got me there. That is completely true. If I was to take my manga knowledge away from my viewing of this arc, like how I viewed Death Note for the first time, the Near arc does get substantially better. I will admit by saying that the arc's quality does certainly go up a few points, considering that some of the changes, although very drastic and being ones that I don't agree with new knowledge of the source material, were not as bad when I watched them without that knowledge, and it could have been a lot worse, to be honest. So I think another big way you're going to view this arc is going to depend on if you did or did not read the manga. To those who did, this arc will not be the greatest time, and I don't recommend that you watch the anime for a faithful adaptation. Watch it with friends to riff on it, I guess. That's what me and Sargent did. But to those who didn't, I think you're going to get a lot more enjoyment out of it, despite it still feeling a little rushed. And to anime-only fans, I do recommend that you go back and read the manga to see just how much was changed, because even though I went into lots of detail, there were still some things I didn't mention. And yeah, thanks Sergeant, that was Very interesting argument. I never thought of it that way before. But there's one thing they didn't fuck up all the way through this show, and that is the voice acting, especially for the dub. One thing I will always give the dub, and it's something that can never be taken away from them, is that from the interviews and the clips I could find of the cast talking about their experience with working on Death Note, and the performances that I heard, is that I can tell that every person they got for this show loved being in it. When you listen to those interviews, you can just tell that these guys loved their respective characters, understood them on a level that's way more than a fundamental understanding, and that they did their homework to give their characters the great performances they deserved. Even those who didn't watch the show have this understanding of their characters and even the core message of the show, which is very, very good to see. Every person I listened to, no matter how minor their role was, seemed to truly get what made Death Note such a big hit, and each of them wanted to do their best in adding on to this legacy of such a beloved franchise, using every skill they had under the sun to achieve that result. From all of these actors coming from either theater or past experiences working on other shows, every actor just sounds like they know what they're doing, and never once does any character feel like they were either miscast or sounded off, because there's a sense that they earned their characters through their auditions, talents, and past work. You can just tell that Carl and the producers spent so much time picking and choosing the exact right people for their roles, and Carl did whatever he could to get the best performances out of them, with most of the actors giving Carl credit for the way he managed to adapt to each of their acting styles so quickly. For a director to do something like that is very impressive, and it's quite rare to see. Death Note, in short, feels like they got the perfect people to do the dub, resulting in one of the greatest dubs I think has ever been put together. Some purists can cope and seethe all they want, but they can never undermine the sheer effort and passion that was put into this dub, regardless of whichever arc they were dubbing. So to wrap it up to my final thoughts, I would say that the anime adaptation, while not sticking true to the manga's pacing in many instances, and dropping the ball when adapting the Near arc, is still a show that I would rank as being one of my favorite animes of all time, solely because those first 25 episodes were just that good. From its binge-worthy presentation, the beautiful adaptations of the core themes and plot beats, the added religious symbolism and wonderful voice acting that had the best of the best, the anime is mostly an excellent adaptation, and is definitely a show that has deserved its hype over the many years since its release. Once again, peak fiction. But did you know that there are 2 OVAs of Death Note that tell a more condensed and abbreviated version of the story? And what if I told you that if you were to watch these 2 films instead of the show itself for the manga, I would judge you with an eye that not even the most judgmental of men would use? Because I gotta say, these OVAs are a whole other beast to tackle, and that will be for another time. So for now, my name is Manga Writer, and I'll see you in the next one.
My name is Manga Artist, and I'll see you in the next one. Fucking hell, that took me 26 minutes. Jesus Christ. Audio recording's fun.
Ha ha ha, fuck you bitch, look at that time spot, you would not have survived.